OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.
It is 7:30 on this Thursday morning. You're welcome along to OTB AM. It is Eoin and Ger with you right the way through until 10 o'clock this morning. And a packed show as ever coming your way. We've got Stephen McGuinness of the PFAI talking to us about the future of the League of Ireland. Later on, we've got Peter Smyth of Sport Ireland joining us to talk about the exercise boom amongst young adults during this pandemic, and a very special State of the Union with IRFU CEO Philip Browne coming your way later on as well. Ger, you're very welcome. What's the crack?
See, we're hello Spider-Man. Hello Spider-Man. You're wearing the same shirt as me there, Eoin.
You got the memo. Do I go top button or not?
Well, I mean, certainly for the full effect, that should absolutely be the case. Or maybe I could just open.
Well, this is a great opportunity. When did you decide to go full top button? When was that decision in your life made?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's just one of those things. You get older and you start doing something, and then suddenly it becomes part of something that you do all the time. This is supposed to be a moment for reflection, right? I should be able to now, at some point during lockdown, be able to look back and pinpoint certain key sliding doors moments in my lives, and one of them would be top button or no top button.
Well, was it a midlife crisis? Was it a moment where you're like, I need to be down with the kids a little bit more, or what was the idea behind it?
Probably the bit where I realised I have no neck. It's like I'm like one of the front rows that has had his neck shortened because of the constant battering that it takes from the scrums, which apart from the game of rugby itself, according to Matt Williams, we're about to hear, is facing an existential crisis itself. Yeah. But you can mimic that a bit. But maybe, I don't know, maybe I've got that completely wrong, and doing the top button up actually makes your neck only look shorter.
Possibly not.
How would it be down with the kids, by the way? Just answer me that. How does it sound like or seem like it's pandering to the kids by doing up your top button? Explain that to me.
Top button was very in when I was in my late teens. It was very in. I did go top button occasionally, but then after a while I was like, what am I doing?
It's cool.
No, not at school. That's kind of in casual wear. At about the ages of 16 and 17, top button was very much in. In and around the 2008, 2009, 2010. That was peak top button era, in my opinion.
So you're like leaving DCU on a Thursday night and going to McGuinness, and you're there with your like top button of a shirt or a polo shirt. What are you wearing?
This is pre DCU, but maybe in my first year of DCU I would have been like a top button guy, check shirt. I'm surprised actually that I've still held on to this shirt. Actually, I tended to kind of move out of checked shirts, but yeah, checked shirt, top button up, and ready to hit them tiles on a Thursday night or any particular night it will be. Listen, anyway, we should just give us a quick explainer of what's going to happen here after 9 o'clock this morning. Outside of top button shirts, this State of the Union series has been brilliant, where we've got into what's actually going to happen with rugby over the next little while. You've already called it a huge opportunity for the sport. Just very quickly, like having the IRFU CEO Philip Browne with us later on is a great opportunity to hear what the IRFU are going to do with this opportunity that they've been presented.
Yeah, so Philip Browne gave obviously a press conference last Friday where he detailed chapter and verse of the financial difficulties that they're facing and how quickly they're going to burn through their reserves. Bear in mind, the IRFU, from a financial perspective, would have been one of the better run sports organisations in this part of the world. And I'm not just talking about Ireland, that they had they bought land in the 90s in Newlands Cross, and they'd sold that for 20 odd million. And so they were sitting on that. They obviously have the CBC money to come. And they were in a position, there was a bit of a rainy day fund there essentially for them to be able to withstand a rainy day. Unfortunately, we're obviously in the midst of gale force in terms of sports economics. And so they're going to burn through their reserves really quickly. So what do they need to do to restart the game? And also, what is the scale of the threat that's facing them at the moment? And over the course of the hour long that we spend with Philip Browne, he uses the word existential threat repeatedly, which would suggest that they are unbelievably concerned about what's going to happen if they don't get the game back up and running on the 22nd of August. So he says they've put a stake in the ground for those interprovincial games to happen in the controlled environment of the Aviva. And if they're not allowed to come back, then the government better give them very good reasons, well thought out reasons why that can't happen. And you look at what's happened in the Premier League over the last 24 hours, the speed with which we've gone from no games, players don't want to do it, to actually all the players are on board now and we're ready to go for full contact training sessions. I would be pretty confident that we're going to get those games back. But then he talks about the importance of international rugby. And also, we talked about CBC and what that money is going to do. And interesting, in the paper today, Neil Francis has a piece saying that this is going to bleed the game dry. I actually don't think that is the case. I think that you have these unions who have never really been able to chart a shared vision of the future and a pathway to that, because of the fact that they are 140 years old or 150 years old or 200 years old. And along comes somebody from the outside and goes, well, what about if we do this, this, and this? And CBC now have enough of a stake in some of the big tournaments and relationship with the unions that they're going to be able to knock heads together and say, this is when the Six Nations is going to be, this is when you're going to release the players from the leagues to play in the Six Nations. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Lions and World Cups. He also talked about Francis Barron's idea, which was in the papers yesterday, about the Summer World Cup, top 16 next year. And I was like, oh, so how did something like that happen? How do you guys find out about that? And he was like, same way you did, reading the papers this morning, which I thought was pretty interesting. So the Lions tour next summer was also something he said. So it's like, and that, you know, they talked about the importance of the Lions to everybody, essentially, as a massive cash cow for the unions. And look, just how does the finance work in World Rugby? Like, you know, when New Zealand come to Ireland, they don't get any money. I didn't realise that. When the Lions travel to South Africa, it's worth about 40 to 50 million for the home union. So it's a massive, massive thing for South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. And the economics of rugby has always been fairly opaque. And I think that's what the unions wanted. So it's great to kind of have him speaking in a very unguarded manner with a former Ireland captain in the shape of Keith Wood. So that's coming your way after 9 o'clock.
Yeah, it sounds great. And the entire series has been brilliant as well. It is State of the Union, and it's available in the rugby section of all our podcasts and offtheball.com/YouTube if you want to watch any of them back. Before all of that, let's get into some rugby from last night. It is Wednesday night rugby. Here is Rory O'Connor and Matt Williams in conversation with Joe Malloy.
We should be reflecting on a Heineken Champions Cup final in Marseille, which would have happened on Saturday. Who would have won, Matt?
Oh, gee, Joe, you know, that's nothing like an easy one in confinement to be hit with straight off. Look, I think Saracens, whoever won out of Saracens and Leinster would have won the Heineken Cup. I probably fancy Saracens to just stick it up to everyone in their last hurrah. But, you know, we'll never know. We'll never know.
We never will. And actually, quick look ahead. We're going to have a catch-all look at the state of rugby in Ireland and for the EPCR at the moment. But with the ideal schedule coming up, Rory, in the autumn, they're planning still to try and finish the Heineken Champions Cup. A lot of Saracens players will have left by then, the likes of Liam Williams, Skelton, George Cruz, I think Maitland. There's a whole bunch, obviously, given their financial situation and the relegation. So they're not there come quarter-final time when it does happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there'll be a championship club by then. So if things go, you know, because the Champions Cup final, it takes place after the new Pro 14 season begins, in theory, which is just weird. Like Munster will be going into this with Damien Dialende and RG Snyman on board. So, you know, they've played a Pro 14 without them, and now suddenly they go into the run-in and, you know, 2 games and playoffs, if it all happens, with an unbelievably stacked squad, and like instantly narrows the gap between them and Leinster, which makes life a bit more interesting. But whether it's, you know, equitable or fair, you'd wonder. And yeah, Saracens will not be the force that, you know, if I agree with Matt, if it had gone ahead as planned, even at the Aviva, I think they could have taken Leinster. It would have been, like, I was really looking forward to that game, and, you know, I don't think anyone was going to stop them from there. But yeah, you take out a couple of players, you rip the soul out of it, and you'd wonder whether they'll be as strong. But I guess we'll be glad of it if there's any sort of rugby at that stage.
Yeah, it's true. Matt, I know the last dispatch I heard from France was that there would be no professional sport until September. They came out with that quite early on in this whole situation. How are things looking there now? Has there been a fall in numbers contracting the virus? The numbers here are quickly improving.
Yeah, a bit the same, Joe. We opened up 10 days ago. You know, I could get out of your village, get out of your town, and go for a walk on the beach or in a forest or a park. Well, the parks are still closed where I am, but it's certainly opened up a lot. Cafes and restaurants open next Monday, I think, and There hasn't been a huge spike in what's a second wave, if you like, but everyone's holding back. I think the real hard part for this part of Europe, the southern part, is the summer and what's going to happen with the massive migration of people coming down from the north. Will they come? Numbers certainly will come. What's going to happen in Spain and southern France that are basically tourist central? I think the second division, the Pro D2 here, has been smashed, as has the lower divisions of Federale. Certainly talk coming out of some clubs in top 14 is of dire financial troubles. We're just really not hearing all the truth of the pictures in there. There's hope that they'll get these games going, but there is some talk that they won't. I've been told by one guy who's a club official, a leading club official, that there is a chance that it will still be not going in September because of the needs of rugby, of the collisions, of the inter-travel between different parts, because what they're looking at is if there's an outbreak in, say, Lyon, then Lyon will be shut down. They won't shut down the whole country, but what happens if it's Lyon and Toulon that are shut down at the same time? What happens to the competition? Like, it's incredibly complicated, and I really feel for the officials, because they're trying to deal with facts they don't have. The things in France were very, very bad, especially in the north, the Parisian area and the area to the east of that. But the rugby heartland wasn't hit as hard. But I don't know if that's going to make any difference in the long run to the ability to get the games going.
And when it comes to the finances at play, I saw the French top 14 chief executive, Paul Gotze. He was talking about a tsunami of clubs going to the wall without government support. Yeah. Obviously, it's a different system over here. I had just wondered, would all the rich club owners pick up the tab and French club rugby would be able to move on?
It's the unknown question, Joe. Bernard Laporte a few weeks ago suggested there might have been 6 or 7 clubs where that was the case. But it depends on what business that the owner's in. Yeah. If he's copped a shellacking through the last 3 months, he mightn't have the cash flow to do it. The French clubs are very lucky in that they are on the equivalent of the dole of unemployment benefits. It's called the chômage. But the crazy system in France is they pick up 80% of your wage. They don't pay you a set figure. They pick up a percentage of your wage. So the French clubs, players and coaches have been, if you like, isolated from this, and the clubs. So they've only had to drop 20%. And even then, some of the players aren't agreeing to drop 20% of their wages. There's been, I think, some pretty selfish behaviour by a number of people in not preparing to take any sort of haircut in this crisis. Now, the government has also said they're going to stop that. That's going to finish in a few months, and they have to stand on their own 2 feet, right. Which I think is quite right. They've been given the amount of the volume of money they've been given compared to the rest of the community, many of them being not foreigners as well. So it's a very complex business situation. But mate, the bottom line of all this, Joe, is that outside of Ireland, the English and the French business models for how they structured their club rugby never worked, and now they're exposed. And many of them will fail. Now, I don't think that's such a bad thing in the long run, because the way they were going about business was just wrong. It was affecting the game around the world, especially in Ireland, but it just couldn't hold. And if some of them have to fall, and by that, they won't disintegrate, they might drop down divisions or they might have to restructure. For the good of the game, I think that might be a very good thing.
Meanwhile, here at home, Rory, we've had Philip Browne in the last week, and more recently, Mick Dawson talking about the situation. There were 12,800 season tickets sold from a Leinster point of view last season, some for as much as €750. So we are talking about millions here. That is now all gone, just wiped off. There's some kind of membership scheme, I think. So if tickets come online, you'll be a priority customer to buy those tickets. But even that, that line in the sand, no season tickets going on sale, 12,800 season tickets sold last season. Dawson was pretty frank. Like, this is not something Leinster can sustain.
No, I don't think any professional sporting organisation can sustain themselves, particularly in the environment rugby operates, where TV money is not that lucrative beyond a couple of months in this scenario. And Philip Browne, like on Friday, Philip Browne did his first press conference since the sport was locked down, and he was fairly frank. He was forthright. There was parts of it that were that you kind of left going, that's pretty good. That sounds good. We're going to get back. And yet there's nagging doubts, and over the weekend probably those doubts creep up even more. You start asking questions, or you look at the answers that he gave, and there's vagueness, a completely appropriate vagueness, because he doesn't know the answers to them. They basically put a line in the stand to say this is what we're working towards, but they need government approval to do that. They need, like, the Premiership in England currently is at a standstill because they don't know what happens if one player tests positive. But the IRFU said we need a date to work towards. We need a start point for training. And then on Monday, Mick Dawson and Leinster come out, I think it was Monday, and they cancel season ticket sales for next year, citing social distancing, just saying you can't have a full RDS as a result of social distancing. And, a lot of this stuff we kind of know, but it's when it's actually decided and it's announced and it's black and white that you kind of take a breath and you realise how stark this is going to be. We can all watch the games behind closed doors, and Bundesliga has been fine. It's not, what you've signed up for, but it's better than nothing. But from a business model perspective, it's pretty bleak. The IRFU will lose between 15 and 20 million euro this year if there's no Six Nations refixtures and no November games. That figure is between 10 and 15 if it goes ahead behind closed doors. So, it's not that big a difference. And if the cost of testing is prohibitive, which it may well prove to be, you wonder what's the point. So, part of you wonders what's the point in going ahead at all. So you've got that at play as well. So, like, they're still working through that. He hasn't got a firm figure on what testing will cost. He doesn't know if players will have to sign a waiver before they come back. He doesn't even know if the government will give them permission. But they have to plan to do something, because if they do nothing, their losses will be worse. But again, behind closed doors doesn't solve much for them.
Did Browne talk about players' salaries, Rory?
Yes, he did. He said, they're in discussions with Rugby Players Ireland. They took a haircut of between 10 and 50% at 5-0. That was a mistake I made when I heard it first. I thought it was 10 and 15 and reported it as such, because whoever told me was, I misheard them, but it was 10 and 50. The top earners like Johnny Sexton and Conor Murray got that 50%. And the lower earners, the younger players, the administrative staff, all of those people would have got the 10%. And that was supposed to be temporary. It sounds like it sounds less and less like that would be temporary. That at some stage they will have to review their wage structure, but they're talking to the Players Union, Rugby Players Ireland, about that. And I guess they're waiting on news as to when they can go back. And, at what point, like I saw today, Leo Varadkar has said that we might accelerate our phases, that the things are good at the moment. Things could come back quicker. That 22nd of April or of August, they could come back. We just don't know yet. But I think cuts are on the way. I don't think that's in any doubt, really, because if your income is down that much, there's only so much you can do to keep the wolves from the door before you start looking at your own cost base.
Yeah. I saw someone quit to him in the Zoom or the Microsoft Teams conference, whatever version of all this was used, that, one of the cheaper things you could do is have players leave the country and be paid by somebody else. And he sort of, joked himself and said that is true. Who knows if something like that happens, Matt? I mean, if your wages are being cut by a percentage like that, and say there are one or two rich French or English owners who can pay your wages, then maybe that becomes more of a reality. It's one of the other unknowns in all this.
Joe, I think one of the things that's striking me is in these times, you need people with really nimble thinking, really people that think out of the square. So tomorrow, Australian Rugby League recommences. The rounds come back now. While everyone that's listening here in Ireland, they're not familiar or don't care really about rugby league, and I fully understand that. My point is, it's a very similar sport to rugby. It's contact. It's a big competition. It's been stood down because of the virus, and they've come back. I really do not understand why people are not doing case studies on what these other contact sports are doing, how they've got to the point they are now. We have to say Australia and New Zealand are a long way in front of Europe as far as they have not been impacted anywhere near as much as Europe with the Corona-19. It just hasn't happened. But they are back playing. Now, there is absolutely no reason for Ireland to not use that as a case study and say, how do we do that? How do we go about it? There are no people at games, but they're back playing, and that gives them some cash flow. Players are taking a haircut with their wages. Everyone's taken a haircut with their wages. but they've got it back on board and they're going back to full competition tomorrow. AFL, Australian rules, will follow in, I think, a month. Now, don't quote me on that. I think it's mid-June, late June that they're starting. Don't quote me, but in a short period of time. Now, I said before in the Irish Times, look, you need people to be able to think, to maybe take games to Australia to a safe environment. But the trick is to get cash coming in the door. Now, the chairman of the Australian Rugby League, Peter V'landys, has been banging down doors of government, been headbutting people to get it going. He's copped a lot of criticism, but his job is to get the game going, and he's done that. And I just think in Europe, we're still looking at that. The game schedule that Philip Browne put out the other day was like the old days. We're going to have a game in Marseille, then we're going to play in Italy play a national game in Rome against Italy, then we're going to play another game here. I just can't see us being able to skip countries. Is that safe for the players? They're thinking on the paradigm before the virus. And the solution to this is coming up with new paradigms. Now, I'm not in those boardrooms and I don't have all the facts in front of me to say, look, we should do X, Y, and Z. But I certainly know that thinking the way we're still thinking, as in back in February, that's not going to solve our problems. The problems are still going to exist if we do that.
If people haven't seen the schedule that they're hoping for in an ideal world, it is Interpros on the final 2 weekends of August at the Aviva Stadium, then Pro 14 semi-finals, then they want to have the Champions Cup quarter-finals, then they'll have a Pro 14 final, then they'll have the Champions Cup semi-finals by the end of September. And then into the next month, October, we'll have the 2 postponed Six Nations games against Italy at home and France in Paris. And then you'll have the Pro 14 season starting, and then you'll have the Champions Cup final, and then you'll be into international games across October, November with the likes of South Africa, I think it's Japan and Australia, all due to arrive. And that includes 3 French clubs in the last 8. That includes South African travel, Australian travel, Japanese travel. Hopeful, is that the euphemism we're using, Matt, for that kind of a schedule?
Oh, wow. I really want the games to go ahead. You don't want to see rugby in the or any sport or the world where we are, and we all need a distraction for sure. Just the community needs something to smile about. But why do it? Why not say, listen, boys, we're in real trouble now. We've got this thing killing everyone. Let's try and think of a way we can do it. It might be Ireland saying we're a safe zone. We are the safe zone. Play the games here. Come over 14 days beforehand. We'll put you into lockdown. We'll test the teams, and we'll play at Thomond Park. We'll play at Croke Park. We'll play at Lansdowne Road at the Aviva. But there is jumping on planes and going from one country to the other, bringing teams over from the south. I mean, Australians aren't allowed to travel to Europe. They're just not allowed to travel. That's just not going to happen. Japan has still got the pandemic is still very, very deep in Japan. You just can't see them being allowed to jump on a plane and jump off in Paris and say, oh, we're all happy. That's how this whole thing started. Now, that's what I'm saying. We need wisdom and a new paradigm of thinking. To me, that schedule, and I really hope I'm wrong because I want rugby to start. I just can't see that schedule possibly being fulfilled because of the pandemic.
Did you get a sense from Philip Browne, Rory, in the press conference that he was fully aware of how, I don't use the word unlikely, but let's use it, unlikely that schedule is?
He certainly wasn't portraying that sense, but as questions flowed in, and it was an hour-long briefing, there was a lot of questions he wasn't fully able to answer as of yet. And I think Matt, everything Matt says is eminently sensible. And once you start thinking about it, and once you start reading, beyond the sports pages and what's going on elsewhere, even the day that Philip Browne gave his briefing was the same day that Tony Holohan spoke about the fact that people who arrive in Ireland will have to self-isolate in a hotel or in a centre for 2 weeks on arrival. And Browne was asked about that, and he said, well, we hope that they'll consider international sports people in a different light, that they're already in some sort of a bubble. But the Irish government, they're not going to, there's an awful lot of trust involved in that, and saying that these people, these sports people, have spent 2 weeks completely unexposed to the virus, that they come in, and there's just steps there that they're going to have to get across government that are so hard to do. And I guess what it does is it exposes the weakness of only having 4 professional teams. At one point, I argued the case that if international travel becomes a problem, why not have an expanded AIL, get the professional players that we have here across the different squads, and give, basically pick your top 8 clubs on provincial lines, get the provincial players into the clubs and have a different kind of competition, just something different that you can sell to a broadcaster, and you play here because international travel is going to be so difficult. And aligning all of those borders, we've seen what's going on in the UK this week. I mean, the chances that they're going to be in lockstep with us, if you could, then you'd have a British and Irish competition, brilliant. But the chances of them being in lockstep with us, the chances of Italy, France, Australia not having a second wave at a critical point. I mean, if there's an outbreak, if there's one case in the squad the week of the Champions Cup final, it throws the whole thing off. And that's where, once you start digging into it, you see the risks. At least in New Zealand, they have a model that is New Zealand teams playing against New Zealand teams in a country that has effectively extinguished the virus. And they can confidently go about that. And the quality of teams and the number of teams just about justifies it. But it might get boring after, once they've completed the first one, if they can't play anyone else, because it's still only 5 teams, but they do have the Mitre 10 Cup to go to. I think we need to, I think Matt's right, we need to be creative. If it is welcoming all these teams to Ireland and having the bubble here, and the government are okay with that, brilliant. Because, like anyone, I want the sport to come back. But if it's just doing it ourselves because our government have approved it and travel is an issue, then maybe we need to be creative about what we do and we come up with something a bit different.
Yeah. What about, Matt, there were suggestions, for instance, that they may have to look at the actual mechanics of the game, i.e. no mauls, no scrums, in a way to make it safer. There is a tipping point when you start meddling with laws like that in the game.
There is. It's a very interesting topic. It's also beautifully rugby. It's been suggested to me that under the guise of the virus, there's a certain group within World Rugby that I would support that want to change a few things, and here's our chance. I mean, the scrums are a blight in the game. The resets will take 3 minutes. I know how much you love the scrums, Joe, but they are terrible blight on the game because they take so long to form. There was one stage there in the World Cup final where after the referee had blown his whistle and called for a scrum, it was 40 seconds till the South African hooker actually got to the mark and put his hands up just to form the scrum. Now that has to change. And they're saying, okay, there's no reset scrums. They also said there's no, what they call face-to-face tackles. So I can't come in with my face next to your face. I have to come in low. There's certainly been a push to bring in the low tackles. It's been resisted by the elite end because that if you come in with a low tackle, it means I've got my hands free and I can offload, which is beautiful for the spectator, but, it makes it hard for the defence. Who cares? Bring it in. And the 50-20 kick, which means if I kick the ball out on the bounce behind my halfway mark, I get the line out. Now, they're the things they want to bring in, and I support them. And this is some way of doing it. And there's no doubt, when you're in a maul or a scrum, the body contact is, for those guys in there, is extraordinary. And to minimise that, and especially if you're thinking getting down the lower levels of the game, I think it's a really, really positive thing. But there's always the law of unintended consequences, especially when you throw these things in without trial. Now, a lot of these other aspects have been trialled. So it's an interesting one, Joe. I'm not so sure it's got real legs, and I think it's thrown out there to see what the reaction would be. The problem in the long term with getting away with scrums is it changes the physiques of the guys. There's some pluses in that. It means the game will become much faster, so it'll be much more aerobic. The bigger, bulky physiques would need to be reduced because the aerobic requirements would jump. But it would also, at the lower levels, take away from, the little guy at primary school who's squat. He's no good at basketball. He's no good at GAA. He's no good at football. He's not fast enough. He hasn't got his endurance. The two is he's important in rugby because he's strong and can hold up a scrum. For those things, I don't want to see that change. So it's as you say, you've got to be very, very careful when we go in for this. If they made the laws and said, look, this is just for professional rugby, okay, I could see that. But I wouldn't like to see that going down to the under 16s and so on.
What are you hearing on that front, Rory?
Pretty much what you were saying yourself, Joe. I mean, I think the no scrums, no mauls thing was a bit of a flyer that came out over the weekend. It's been kind of watered down to a reduction, as Matt said, because of so basically to get rid of reset scrums and they reckon that would bring down the risk of transition by 30%, because the average exposure time for second rows and props is 13.4 minutes. So you'd bring that down to, I think, below 10 minutes if you reduce resets. So like that makes sense. It does invite the idea that if you're a weaker, like England in the World Cup final, you just collapse and give them a free kick and deal with it. And I know the World Cup final, there was a lot of resets, and I don't understand, like I played in the front five, I don't understand why it takes so long to set up a scrum. It doesn't make any sense. Maybe if the thread is hanging over front rows and scrum coaches, they might speed up, because really there's no reason that they all take a big long break and look at each other for so long. Just get in there and push. That's just, like, that would easily fix most of the problems. If you put a timer on it, maybe that'd be good. But anyway, so the other thing is, the high tackles, they think that'll bring down the risk of exposure by 20%. So like that, you can see why they're doing that. I think what they're going to do is they're going to bring that in this week through the executive the executive committee of World Rugby. But it will be basically an option for any union to take. So if the Irish government are pushing back against rugby coming back as a whole, the IRFU can then say, well, what if we did this? This is how we feel it will reduce the numbers. And maybe then NFET or whoever's making that decision will go, well, look, it brought down the acceptable risk to us. But in New Zealand, because the risk of transmission is so low, because basically the virus has been stamped out there, they don't need to do that. It's probably, it's not a one size fits all for rugby across the world. And they do say it is temporary. But I think Matt's right. It suits them to get rid of resets. It suits them to get rid of high tackles. That they're two of the things they're hot on anyway. So I think they're probably a little bit of trying to get, see what this could be their trial for those things to kind of push them forward, because they want to reduce concussions and they want to speed up the game.
So you played in the front five. Were you one of the young lads who was no good at anything that Matt was talking about then? I'm an old lad who's no good at anything now. I certainly wasn't small though.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
The Saturday panel
On Off the Ball.
There's a growing hostility towards cyclists. We're somehow seen as a nuisance, when in fact we're just people trying to get to work.
I've never ever gotten one bad word said to me about my sexuality, or from the opposition, or from, actually in one match I was nearly, the girl was marking me so tightly, I was like, I have a girlfriend.
I'm not the person I was 10 years ago, and that doesn't worry me. I know I can play good enough golf.
Don't miss the panel every Saturday afternoon, only on Off the Ball.
OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.
Just gone 3 minutes past 8 on this Thursday morning. You've been listening to Matt Williams and Rory O'Connor on Wednesday Night Rugby. The full piece available now on youtube.com/off the ball. Joe, we've got some interesting stuff coming up this morning, not least Peter Smyth, the Director of Research at Sport Ireland. A report issued yesterday that basically more people are exercising in this country than ever before. A direct impact of the pandemic, I would say definitely the most positive thing that has come out of everything that's happened over the last 8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, I guess I don't know if you're doing any more exercise, but I certainly am, and everybody I know is doing way more exercise. I think part of that was the fear of, like, if I get sick and I am as unfit as I am currently, that's not going to end very well. So maybe I should.
Is that really what?
Here
Is that really the way you were thinking, that it is sort of existential? I need to protect myself.
Yes. What can I do here? What do I have control over? Like, I think a lot of people went through. I'm going to eat my way and drink my way through this at the very start. I was like, wow, it's the end of the world. I may as well go out in a high. And then it was like, actually, it's not really going to be the end of the world. I should do my bit here to. One, distract myself. Two, give myself some endorphins from exercising. And three, give myself the best possible chance of boosting my immune system. So that was my experience. And I'm sure everybody has a lot of different things. Part of it is to get out of the house and get some headspace. And then the rest of it is like getting your kids active as well. So like every day we're making sure that we get our kids out for some kind of activity in a way that, like, you would have been a bit laissez-faire about, like, oh, they walk to school today, so that's their exercise done for the day. I also think that it is about a lot of people having way more time when the commute disappears. And again, this is obviously only for those people who were in commutes. But so last week, obviously, I was driving to work and it was still quiet. This week, it's been completely different. But I can get in and out of town in 10 minutes driving, which normally could be anything up to an hour, depending on the time of day that you're doing that journey in traffic. It was 20 minutes yesterday, for example. So the traffic is coming back. It's back on the roads. The construction sites are busy. And I think everybody understands that a lot of people have gone back to work over the last week. So commute times are starting to build back up again. But that extra time in your day, suddenly you're like, well, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to waste this time? Or am I actually going to do something that's going to have a long-term benefit to me and hopefully to my family? And yeah, that was kind of how I found extra time for exercise. And it knocks on. You kind of feel a bit better. I mean, obviously I'm unbelievably sore all the time, which I kind of thought would pass at some point. But are you doing more exercise?
Yeah, loads more. Absolutely, loads more. I definitely. I think that like we'll get the exact statistics from Peter Smyth later on, and I'm sure there wasn't this question in the survey, but I would like to know how many people feel that they're at their fittest at any point over the last 5 years, particularly people, I don't know, in and around their mid to late 20s or early 30s who, I don't know, went to college and then just dropped everything for a little while. This is kind of the first opportunity where it's like, you can't go out, you don't really have a commute. This is the first time in your life where really there isn't an excuse. I don't have time doesn't pass as an excuse anymore. And I would say there's a good wedge of those people that are reflected in the statistics who are at their most aerobically fit at the very least over the last couple of weeks. I'm not sure if anybody's standing on the scales and saying I've lost loads of weight or anything like that, people who want to get in shape or anything like that over the last few weeks, because everybody's eating crap food and everybody's using that as a form of comfort, which I think is fine. But I think it's possible to be in that shape, but also say I'm actually much fitter than I was 2 months ago as a result of the fact that I've got loads of time to pound the pavements or whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, it turns out your demographic are walking, according to the stats. There's been essentially a doubling in the number of people aged 25 to 34. You just squeak into that right now, right? Who've gone walking and are using that as their primary. If you remember last year when we did the triathlon, right? Do you remember the first night we went out cycling and we cycled out to Howth Head and I had stopped twice. I stopped on the hill on the way up and I stopped at the top and watched you do the laps. And then I cycled back and was like, oh, Darren Hill, this is great. And the whole notion of cycling 20 kilometres was intimidating and it's seemingly impossible. I'm cycling 20 kilometres every day now. And it's like, it takes 40, 45 minutes. But like the difference in fitness that has come about because of this, where you just get out and do something, has been like revolutionary in terms of your approach to this. We're starting a duathlon in the next couple of weeks as well. We're going to do run, cycle, run. And again, there would have been no prospect of me doing that this time last year because I just wouldn't have been able for it. But now I'm like, how far could I actually go? And am I going to time myself? Am I going to so there's definitely been a dividend from having the time to reflect and that work-life balance shift and new work practices where we can actually legitimately record stuff that previously we would have had to have 4 or 5 people in the building to do properly. And everybody accepts the quality of the broadcast is going to be slightly different from what it would be if we were both in studio there now this morning. But at the same time, it's really good. And so therefore people are willing to make that accommodation. And the knock-on to that is that everybody's life changes.
The only thing now is that it's just a reduction of 2 bottles of wine per week to actually get into peak physical condition. That is the next step. But I'll take one of the two at this moment, the actual fitness at this point or the actual exercise. Sheahan, Hannon, you're with us this morning. How are things?
Not too bad, Owen. Keeping well. The takeaway increase is another thing that has to be watched as well. I've taken too many takeaways in the last... I've had, I think, 3 in the last 10 days maybe, which is far too many.
I think everybody's in a state of self-forgiveness at this point. Has it made it difficult for you? Because you've moved back to Monaghan, right?
Yeah, just for the duration of this. I'm probably doing more exercise as well, I think. But then you'd fear for gyms maybe at the end of all this. People have more time, more willingness to do it, and I guess there's no excuse, as you said. There's no likelihood of people having to do anything else. So, yeah, people might realise this is the way forward. Gyms might struggle for a little time off the back of this, but yeah, it's strange.
And are you finding that your physical output has increased tenfold over the last little while as well?
Oh, 100%. Doing far more. And look, the last dance is gone now, so that part of my motivation is disappeared from my eyes. But you could stick on a Year Till Sunday in the background or something to keep yourself pumped up. Just have it constantly in the background. But people I think are, and I on a serious note think things like The Last Dance have helped. People have watched these incredible athletes and their motivation and what keeps them ticking. And if that gets someone out for a walk in the evening time more often than not, then it can only help. But I think even with my family as well, a lot of us have been exercising a lot more. So that's one positive we can take from this whole thing.
You've been pounding the pavements, going, be like Mike, be like Mike, be like Mike.
I still don't have his shoes though. His shoes would really help. But yeah, it's. If you think of Jordan Psyche though, and you see Dennis Rodman going partying in Las Vegas, coming back and then beating them all at the runs the next day in training, then we don't really have an excuse, except for the fact that we're drinking too much beer and eating too many takeaways. But that's nothing compared to Rodman's partying. So
everybody is Dennis Rodman during this lockdown, I think. Everybody is burning, not burning the candle at both ends, burning it at one end, and then there's a brand new candle of hope and healthiness, which we're also burning, just to take that analogy to the next level. Shane, what is going on in the world this morning?
Yeah, we'll kick off with soccer news this morning, lads. Republic of Ireland boss Stephen Kenny has made another addition to his backroom team. The FAI finally reached an agreement with Dundalk last night to allow Rory Higgins to join the setup as chief scout and opposition analyst. Higgins had been assistant manager at Oriel Park since Kenny's departure from the club. Meanwhile, the players and staff at Bows, Derry City, Dundalk and Shamrock Rovers will undergo another round of COVID-19 screening next Monday. There were no positive results from the first round of screening, which took place earlier this week. It is hoped those 4 European qualified clubs can resume training on the 8th of June. Meanwhile, Premier League clubs will discuss when to restart matches when they meet again this morning. Teams voted unanimously in favour of a return to contact training yesterday before revealing 4 people at 3 sides tested positive for COVID-19 in the latest round of screening. The top flight will also look at where fixtures will be played. The GAA's Director General, Tom Ryan, insists that the reopening of grounds must be safe. There have been calls in recent days to open the gates ahead of the current proposed date of July the 20th. But Ryan does say they're guided by concern for the safety of their members and added that the association's advisory group is working on a roadmap for the return to activities. Rugby League and Super League clubs are meeting today to discuss options for resuming their season. Matches have been suspended for them since the 15th of March. Meanwhile, Matt Williams says getting rid of the scrum at elite level would be good for the sport. The former Leinster head coach says scrums are a terrible blight on the game, with resets taking too long. You can read Matt's full thoughts. He was on Wednesday Night Rugby last night with Joe and indeed Rory O'Connor as well. That full article is up on our website. That's otbsports.com. To Formula 1 news this morning, lads. McLaren has hailed the decision to introduce cost cutting from next season as a crucially important moment for the sport. Each team backed the moves, which will see spending capped at $145 million from 2021. McLaren says Formula 1 had become financially unsustainable in recent years. Mercedes, of course, have had a dominance over the sport in recent years as well. So that could come to an end with these financially viable caps. And finally, lads, for me this morning, the Nevada State Commission has given the green light for Las Vegas to host boxing and MMA events from this weekend. Combat sports had been suspended in the state since March the 14th due to the pandemic, but the UFC will run a card in Las Vegas this Saturday. Promoters Top Rank are also aiming to have a boxing event in the city on June the 9th.
Good stuff, Shane. Thanks for that. Let's tell you what's coming up this morning on OTB AM. It is 13 minutes past 8, by the way, on this Thursday morning. In about 7 minutes' time, we're going to get stuck into Stephen McGuinness. He's going to be joining us to talk about the League of Ireland and the players and what is going to happen with the return to play in the League of Ireland, the potential revenue streams and the implications that could have on the future of the players and their livelihoods over the next little while. So that's coming up at around 25 past 8 this morning. Sport Ireland, as we've been mentioning, the idea that Ireland is at its most healthiest exercise-wise, according to a report that came out yesterday. We'll be getting into that at around 20 to 9, and then State of the Union with Philip Browne at 10 past 9. Before that, it is time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
We'll start with offtheball.com. I don't see us getting 80,000 people in Croke Park, but we can still play. These are quotes from a piece last night on the show. John O'Mahony, immunologist Kingston Mills and epidemiologist Anthony Staines were on the show with Joe to talk about the possibility of sport returning despite social distancing. As you can see there, the outlook, as you can imagine, is that getting a full Croke Park is a pipe dream at the moment. Elsewhere on offtheball.com, tantamount to homicide. Sections of Brazil remain out of touch with reality. You've got lines from that Wednesday Night Rugby piece last night. Rugby should seize chance to get rid of terrible blight on the game. Frankel or see the stars. Mick Cannan knows who he would pick. And as Shane just mentioned there, Las Vegas given the green light to resume boxing and MMA events.
The first one for me this morning is the Irish Independent, and looking at that there, Howard puts best foot forward to make hay while sun shines. So this is a series of great photographs that are going around at the moment about how athletes are responding to lockdown. You've seen people running the roads, pounding the streets to make sure that they are retaining their elite level fitness. Joyce and Canning lead Galway Drive and West Best. So Pádraig Joyce has been rated as the best footballer of the last 50 years by Martin Breheny and Joe Canning as the best Galway hurler. Michael Fennelly hangs up club boots as injuries become a burden. I don't remember where Michael Fennelly finished in the list of best players, but definitely in terms of somebody whose career was curtailed by injury and still had an amazing career, I feel like he could have been in that conversation for Kilkenny's best top 3, top 4 hurlers ever. But just, because the dynamism with which he was able to take over games from midfield or centre forward, very few players were actually able to do that when a match was completely in the melting pot. What Fennelly could do was impose himself physically, and then he also had the hurling ability. So, he could score points, but he could also get forward and score goals. He was an amazing creator. And if he just hadn't had the back injury, which turned him into 70% sometimes of what would have been 100%, and that 70% was still an all-star and still one of the best players in the field. Look, he had an absolutely sensational career, and I really hope that his managerial career is as good as I think it's going to be, because, when you talk to him, he's somebody who's very thoughtful about the game. He's obviously been heavily invested in the science of sport, really at the same time as he was being an elite sportsman, which is very rare. So, that's his career as well as his passion. So best of luck with that, and congratulations on an amazing career.
The Irish Examiner this morning leads with Simon Lewis's piece that protocols are clearer ahead of rugby's summer break. Juliet awaits as new open date may be fixed today. Meanwhile, that's on golf, while key meeting for top flights clubs with restart date high on the agenda. This is in regards to the Premier League. Small number of Cork clubs, meanwhile, opt to pull the plug on 2020 cool camps, which is big news. They'd been slated to still go ahead, I think, in a lot of places around the country, but a couple of clubs in Cork pulling the plugs on that. And Gleeson welcomes new Euro dates for girls in green. Assistant manager Eileen Gleeson has described as fantastic the news that senior Irish women's team are set to play their remaining 3 European Championship qualifiers this year.
Yeah, the cool camps thing is interesting because, as a parent, we just signed our kids up for cool camps in July in the hope they will go ahead. Obviously, there were various scientists coming out and saying, "Oh, you could totally do that. That would be no problems if, the adult stays socially distant from the kids," which is 100% going to happen. So, there's a lot of unknown stuff at the moment, but things are also moving unbelievably fast as well. So, Murray Eye's return at new British event. This is the next one. This is the London Times today. Andy Murray talking about it, playing behind closed doors event organised by his brother Jamie. And that picture is Bobby Firmino back in the groove at training yesterday.
The Irish Times this morning leads with a piece on New Zealand. Safe return in New Zealand showcases true value of sport. We watch with hope and little envy as New Zealand gets sporting life up and running again, writes Johnny Watterson. No easing of limits until group reports. Meanwhile, this is Tom Ryan, who said that the GEA will be making no accelerated moves towards easing current restrictions until its COVID-19 advisory group reports. And then finally there, on the front page of the Irish Times sports section, Gavin Comiskey writes, Sports Nerd Heaven. Irish Elite logging on for Analytica Zoom Part 2. Harrington to join Farrell et al. On Zoom call raising money for Pieta House.
I'm back. Deanie's convinced to return to training. This is one of the refuseniks who's changed his mind. I'm the captain of a Premier League team. I can't just sit back and let everyone else do the work. This is the back page of the Mirror. Cop get tough over £50 million Timo. So obviously they want that deal to happen. Just 4 new positive tests give Prem hope, and all clear in League of Ireland. That's the story that we're going to get to next.
The Irish Daily Star leads with Troy Soldier. Deanie's back to lead Watford after voicing coronavirus fears. Kenny's September start. Stephen Kenny's Ireland reign is set to start in late September. You've got pride of place for Lisa. This is Lisa Fallon, pictured in Lucan yesterday, who's been announced as the head coach of the London City Lionesses. GEA try to stick with cool. GEA chiefs are working to ensure their annual cool camps do go ahead this summer and there'd be people smoking crack or heroin downstairs. I did not want that. Sprinter Leon Reid runs from chaos to world class.
And the Mail for you this morning, I think that's next. Door is shut is the headline on that one. It's the GAA story, obviously the in-house interview that the Director General gave yesterday. And GAA on track to unlock club gates, says Ryan. This is opening time. And clock's ticking. Louise in limbo over soon to expire Arsenal deal. This is one of the other issues that hasn't really been fully addressed about those players who are going to be out of contract and exactly what's going to happen. So,
the back page of the Herald is green light for contact. Premier League takes big step for return on June 20. Negatives a positive, I should say, for League of Ireland clubs. All players and staff at League of Ireland's 4 European representatives have tested negative for COVID-19. And then there's a breakdown of Martin Brehony's top 20 hurlers and footballers in the Leinster counties over the last 50 years.
And then finally for me, The Guardian, Reds lead rebate rebellion. Liverpool among those against refunding £330 million to TV giants. So funnily enough, the rich clubs in the Premier League don't want to give any money back to the TV companies who haven't actually had the TV product that they were promised when the contracts were signed. So again, the lawyers are all going to make a fortune out of what's coming next in big time football.
Finally for me then, it is the Daily Telegraph that leads with the same story really. Clubs prepare for a clash over £340 million cost of TV rebate. Just a couple of notes there. Premier League elite argue they should not pay more. Players begin full contact training after clubs vote, and that brings us up to speed on the sports pages this morning. Delighted to say now that General Secretary of the PFAI, Stephen McGuinness, is with us on the line. Good morning to you, Stephen.
Hey, Alan, how are you?
Very well, thanks. So we're talking at the moment about making the League of Ireland and the comeback worthwhile. Basically, can the FAI afford this? Can it make the back pockets fuller than you might think they might be because of the fact that without people going through the turnstiles at League of Ireland clubs, there is the most important revenue stream missing. So Niall Quinn, I understand, is going to do a call with some League of Ireland players tomorrow. What sort of questions are going to be asked of him at that point?
Yeah, I suppose first of all, it was great to see the test results yesterday coming back. Obviously, with no positives. The social responsibility from our players has obviously been very good. And we're in contact with the players regularly. They requested a meeting with Niall to discuss the current situation in relation to return of the league. Obviously, we have 4 teams, hopefully back training on June the 8th. But we've also got, as I'm sure you're aware, 19 teams in the league, and 50% of the players in the Premier Division are only on the COVID wage subsidy scheme. So it's important for the players to get a feel from the FAI about where our game is going and when the potential return is. I think our players look across Europe, and in the majority of leagues, particularly the summer leagues, nearly all of them now have a restart date, and we don't have that yet. So I think the players are looking to the hierarchy of the FAI for some clarity around when our game is going to return, or if our game is going to return, and what's in place and what the plans are and how far down the line are the plans, and how realistic is it that we will see professional football from a league point of view back hopefully in August is the plan, but from a financial perspective, exactly where are we? And I think it's in the past maybe the FAI would have dodged meetings with players or wouldn't have been up front. And I think you got to give credit to Niall. He was more than willing to meet with each delegate of the clubs in a group call tomorrow with us. And I think that's hugely important, that the information and the exact position where it's at, that the players are made fully aware of it.
Do you know what the potential revenue streams might be, Stephen?
I suppose, like everything on it, streaming is one part of it. There's obviously, I think the wage subsidy scheme that is currently in play with the government, I think that's key for our clubs to maintain and to continue to be able to honour the contracts. I think that's very important. I think the FAI put a huge investment into the testing. I think it's upwards of 200,000 is their investment into it. I think the investment is not just about the elite end of the game. I think it's the return of all elements of the game, whether it's amateur, schoolboy, schoolgirl. I think the investment that the FAI have made into it is to ensure that all our games return at a point down the line here, but be able to prove to government that our sport is safe. But from a financial perspective, There is assistance needed. There's no two ways around it. Our monthly wage bill in our league will be roughly 600,000. So it's a significant amount of money that has to be raised. And as you say, we're so reliant on match day revenue, and with no crowds in, that leaves obviously a gaping hole. And you would think assistance would be needed. I mean, I'd be disappointed looking at FIFA with cash reserves of 2.3 billion. You would think that they would be looking right across Europe at the leagues and looking to assist. And up to now, FIFA haven't done that. And it's hugely disappointing, considering what has gone on behind the scenes at FIFA. You'd think that they would come. And I suppose as much as we look to our governing body to assist the game, and the FAI financial situation is well known, but a body like FIFA who governs the game, you would expect them at some stage here to be able to assist the game at both grassroots and at an elite level. And I'd be hopeful that they will come. Right,
okay. Like, it's great to hear that there is hope that might come, but in the eventuality that doesn't come, it seems that if there's going to be €600,000 required to pay wages, and 50% of that is being made up currently of the COVID subsidy, you're kind of looking for something in the region of €300,000. And is that going to come from streaming alone, Stephen? That's probably a big question.
I think we all have to be realistic, and I think it is going to take everybody to get around the table if we are going to get this get football back. I think there is a point in time where everybody has to sit around, and there may need to be a movement and a leap of faith from everybody a little bit here to get the game back. I think the European teams have obviously European competition, which brings in significant cash flows. But for the other 6 teams who aren't in Europe, it is difficult. I know the FAI are trying to look at what the gate receipts and match day revenue, what them figures are, and can there be investment from them into it, and can the clubs look at different revenue streams to ensure that we get the season up and running? I think it would be catastrophic for the league if we didn't get back, and we were looking at a restart of March. I mean, there's players' careers. Obviously, there's lots of top young players. I think we see that with our under-21 international team and the talent that's in the league, to have them a season out of their careers, and the careers are quite short as it is. And then obviously look at the elephant in the room is the players' contracts, and they do have a contract, and the contracts have to be honoured, and that's something that we all don't want to find ourselves facing off in relation to a contract. So hopefully, as I said, everybody can get around the table and ensure that the gap that you talked about there can be minimised as much as possible. But there is going to be a little bit of a risk for everybody coming back, and that's both financial and from a health and safety perspective. So, as I said, from a PFA point of view, we're very much open to discuss whatever it takes for a game to come back. The players, the 5 clubs who are continuing to play, the players respect the level that the clubs have gone to. And hopefully, as I say, that as each week goes on, that we get closer to a resolution on this. And obviously FIFA pushing their meeting back to mid-June has delayed things slightly in regards to a decision being made. But I think, as you said, it's important that the FAI are upfront with the players, and I'm sure Niall will be, and to put them in the picture of where he sees it, both short term and medium term.
Just on those FIFA payments, there was a story last month, I should say, about FIFA paying out to its member organisations something to the tune of, I think, €450,000. Are you saying that more money on top of that is required, or is it that those funds have yet to be fully rubber stamped and are yet to be in the coffers of the FAI?
Yeah, I'm talking about more significant money than that. Right. I mean, we've been in contact with FIFA, the World Players Union, who have been lobbying with FIFA for leagues to return of similar size to ourselves. There is distress everywhere from a financial perspective, and when you have a governing body who is carrying that type of 2.3 billion in cash, you would think at some stage here they look around the game, and they've had such controversy during Sepp Blatter's time, that here's a time now that FIFA can really stand up and show that they cared about football, and they cared about the game right across Europe and right across the world. Because there's lots of people, like we said, would look at FIFA and just wonder what does the organisation do? Like, the game is on its knees in some countries. And morally, I think they have an absolute responsibility to assist the game right across the world, and they have a huge opportunity to do it now.
Look, Stephen, I totally understand exactly how that pile of cash that they're sitting on must be very galling for anybody involved in football at the level you're at. The difficulty, I suspect, though, is that if they give some to Irish clubs, do the Premier League clubs then knock on the door and say, well, why does Shamrock Rovers deserve it more than Southampton or any of the teams in England? And like, I think that very quickly that 2.3 billion would disappear if they have to pay Neymar, for example. So there needs to be some kind of system in place where it's a relief fund for leagues that are about to go to the wall. And I guess that kind of leads back to the point of just how existential is this crisis. We have Philip Browne on, the chief executive of the IRFU, talking with Keith Woods just after 9 o'clock this morning. And he uses the word existential a lot and has called on the government here to step in. So maybe that's the first route, is to exhaust exactly what the possibility of getting money from the Irish government is and what level of support they're going to offer to professional sport. Again, that's a very difficult thing for them to do because, you know, a load of people are going to lose their jobs and we're facing a very difficult time. So what value do we as a society place on making sure that these sports continue to function? And what's the societal value of having a football club like Shamrock Rovers or St. Pat's or Sligo Rovers or Cork City, which is a community centre and a community hub, and how it reaches into the community? So a lot is up. It's a very complicated situation that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, it is. And I think you were speaking about it earlier as well, about from a social point of view, from a mental health point of view, from an activity point of view. Like, soccer is the most participated sport in the country. And as you said, Ger, it covers thousands upon thousands of people every single weekend. Lots of people live for sport, live for football, live for rugby, live for GAA. And I do think there is a government responsibility. I can only speak about football, and I suppose it is galling for somebody like myself and anybody involved from a union perspective. And you look at FIFA and you look at the cash reserve, and I do get your point around the Premier League and how it's done, but it's got to be a bottom up. You've got to work with each federation. I know that there has been contact between FIFA and the FAI, and they've written to them and outlined from a financial perspective where our league is at. There is obviously a responsibility of government. Now, the government have been very good to our game, I have to say, particularly in the last number of months. You'd be aware of the assistance that they've given to football. Without the government's assistance, I shudder to think where Irish football would be. So they have assisted. I do think they have a role to play. I don't think there's any doubts about that. I think they're playing a role now in ensuring that sport gets back. But they do have a responsibility, obviously. And I suppose that's for them to decide with the NGBs. And to ensure that we have a healthy sport to return to when everybody gets back to playing and participating.
Is there a possibility that some clubs actually go to the wall at this point? Is that the point that we're at in this story, do you think?
I suppose, like everything, like I'm aware of even at small clubs in Leinster senior leagues and amateur leagues around the country are struggling because they haven't got any revenue streams. At the professional end, Ger, I suppose, you've 50% of the teams who are paying only COVID payments, so they don't really have a massive outlay. I think right now everybody's okay, everybody's fine, but it's when contracts have to be honoured, and I suppose there's a number of clubs who haven't paid players their wages for 10 to 12 weeks now, and when that bill falls due, I think there is a huge difficulty there how that's going to be managed. And if we don't get back to play, I don't see any opportunity to be paying that. At least if we come back to play, you've some chance of paying the bills. But if we don't come back to play, I think there's a hugely difficult situation for the players, the clubs, and everybody. And nobody wants to see any club go to the wall. But there is potential that if contracts aren't honoured, that is the only route open. And that's why we're so keen to try and get the game back, and so keen to try and work with the clubs to ensure that we don't get to that scenario.
I have one last question on this. The IRFU obviously put as they say, the stake in the ground of August 22nd for a match to be played in the Aviva, and it's it's going to be an interprovincial, so there's no travel involved. There's a sense that if football was to pick a date and work towards that it puts pressure on everybody to get ready for that. And actually, that's no bad thing. Like, we've seen the tests begin to work for the European teams. That could roll out between now and August. That's 2 months away. For the other teams in the league, you could by that stage see that the retransmission rate has fallen even further. There's some reports that it's no longer in the community. Like, we're going to see exactly what happens over the next 2 months, and fingers crossed it all goes in the right direction. Would you be in favour of just picking a date and saying that's the return of the league, and let's just build towards that, and almost to see if that can create its own kind of internal momentum?
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Jen. I think that's what the players are looking for. I think that would be one of the questions to Niall on Friday is putting that stake in the ground. There's provisionally looking at dates around August 14th of a return. So currently, obviously, the players return to training on June 8th. Our players will be tested 12 times before the tournament on July 20th and tested another 4 times during the tournament. So we're then hopeful, obviously, that everything is clear from that end, from a health and safety perspective, and that you were then looking at return from a league perspective around the 14th of August. But you would like that just to be, as you said, marked in the sand and saying, here's the date that we're going to return, and everybody then building towards that and building momentum towards that with the rest of the teams returning to training on the 28th of June. So again, that's something that the FAI have to decide. They're obviously in discussions with the clubs and have had numerous meetings with them. I think there's 3 or 4 meetings with the clubs last week. And we do understand fully the financial situation of the clubs. Nobody wants, as a director of a club, to trade recklessly and come back if financially it isn't viable. We absolutely understand that. But players do have contracts that have to be honoured, and it is a really difficult time for everybody. But as you're saying, I do think that if a date is picked and that August 14th is a date being floated at the moment, that it also gives the players in their own minds a date that they can focus on, because at the moment they're training like endlessly with no sort. You need a focus. You need to know what you're training towards. Our European teams have that now with the July 20th tournament, and I think the players will be asking the same question on Friday of when exactly do they see themselves returning to play.
Stephen, how concerned would you be about the government looking at the COVID subsidy scheme and adjusting that, bringing down the number? Because I think it's inevitable that will happen before social distancing is eradicated, before you will have the normal revenue streams of League of Ireland clubs come back.
Owen, if that was removed, that would have a massive effect. We'd be in serious trouble. Like, it covers currently about 2/3 of the wage, the wage subsidy scheme. So if that was to be pulled from a professional football point of view, we'd be in massive trouble. And I think there does have to be discussions around that. You don't like putting huge. I mean, everybody is in the same, whether you're a vintner, whether you're a hotels, everybody's looking for assistance. I understand that. But from our perspective, if the wage subsidy scheme was removed, we would be in serious trouble, because every single club in our league is utilising it at the moment. And as you said, the match day revenue is that's where the main cash flow comes from for our league. Unfortunately, it shows our league from how it's structured, that with no TV deal and no real proper commercial deals, that we are so reliant on match day revenue, and that's why we're in such financial difficulty at the moment. And the wage subsidy scheme, Owen, is absolutely key for the future of our game, both in the short term and medium term. That has to stay in play. If that is taken out, I just don't see how we return.
And that's a legacy, I guess, of a load of revenue streams not properly being explored over the last 10-15 years of the League of Ireland as well. Like, kind of on a final point then, if you're preparing yourself for the worst, are you preparing the players to face that eventuality of finding work elsewhere if the number of professional players that are able to be employed in this country have to dwindle? Hopefully it never comes to that, but if that is the reality, do you, as the head of the PFAI, have to help prepare the players for that eventuality?
Yeah, we do, and we've put a huge amount of time and effort. We've hired full-time staff member in that area in player development, and we have been working with the players to prepare them for whatever eventuality comes along. And we are hopeful on that professional football survives through this. We're confident that the players can and hopefully will mentally be prepared for whatever eventuality comes along. I do think there's a general will there for our clubs to return. I think there have been some media reports that maybe a number of the clubs, for various reasons, wouldn't want to return. But any club I've spoken to is desperate to return. They just need to make sure that it's financially viable to do that. And if it is, I think we'll have every club will return. There is going to have to be an element of risk, no matter what. There's no way the FAI in a financial position to ensure that no club is going to lose any money in returning to play. I think that's unrealistic. But I do think that there's a general will there from the supporters, from the players, and from the clubs themselves to return. And hopefully over the next couple of weeks, that decision can be made, and that we can get football back, and that from a financial perspective, that in the short and medium term, that our game can prosper. But what you said on earlier is the key thing here. We need to learn from this. Our game hasn't been protected the way it should have been. It didn't get the care and attention that it deserved. And out of this, I think we have seen that a proper TV deal, proper commercial deals need to be in place. And that's something from Niall and Gary Owens and Roy Barra, who are right at the top end of the game, the FAI, have to ensure that that's in place in the future. Because if not, our game is never really going to grow. And it probably shows right now the difficulty our game has due to the lack of care that the game has got over the last 10, 15 and 20 years.
All right, Stephen McGuinness, thanks a million for taking the call this morning. All the best.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks, Ger.
Stephen McGuinness of the PFAI there on the line. Right, Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, are marking the 10-year anniversary of the official opening of the Aviva Stadium and its proud long-term sponsorship of the iconic venue. Over the past 2 weeks, we've been paying tribute to some of the most iconic sporting moments of the past 10 years in the Aviva Stadium. Last week, we saw an All-League of Ireland final as Ciarán Kelly's FAI Cup penalty shootout heroics in 2010 won the whole thing out. So now, on the rugby week, we're down to our semi-finals. Yesterday, Robbie Henshaw qualified for the final after you voted for his try over Ryan Crotty's heartbreaking try for New Zealand in 2013. There would have been something wrong had Ryan Crotty ended up winning that. So thankfully, Robbie Henshaw came out on top on that one. This morning, it's Jacob Stockdale's try versus the All Blacks in 2018. That is up against Brian O'Driscoll's Six Nations record-breaking try versus England in 2011. And as you can see, Jacob Stockdale is killing it at the moment. It's not going to get beaten, Jerry, is it? I mean, like in terms of Aviva Stadium moments, like last week when we were talking about the Denmark game and how amazing that anthem was and the atmosphere that built on that night and then was eventually eradicated by Christian Eriksen and his Danish compatriots. This was not the case on the All Blacks night. This was an unbelievable atmosphere from the start, and then it just got louder and louder and louder.
Yeah, winner, winner, chicken dinner. I think that's what's important. The Robbie Henshaw try against England, what I don't understand. What's so special about that? I haven't gone back to look at that one.
Well, it's not Ryan Crotty's try is, I think, the key point in that.
I think that, a bit like the Mayo football team, unlimited heartbreak is part of what it means to be an Irish sports fan in everything. Like the last minute, it's so iconic. Ireland losing in the last minute. You think Gordon Hamilton against Australia in a World Cup quarter-final in the same stadium, and then that great Australia team who goes on to win the World Cup march down the pitch and beat us. And it's like, well, if we don't have those, we might lose the run of ourselves and have another Celtic Tiger. And sure, that's no good for us, isn't it?
Like, I get what you're saying. Like, in terms of Ireland's most important sports moments, I think Ryan Crotty's try gave us a period of a little bit of self-reflection, but mostly a near miss that we eventually got around later on. And like the just desserts of that, as Jacob Stockdale's try, we're not going to surely put Robbie Henshaw's try against England, or any win against England for that matter, behind a defeat to the All Blacks, an agonising defeat at that.
No, and Robbie Henshaw's try, I've just looked at it there, is it's a beautifully fielded, the best Westmeath fielding that you're going to see this side of John Heslin, and it's killing of England, which we very much enjoy. But look, Stockdale's try is sensational, and it has brio, it has a daring, which is not that Irish when it comes to a lot of stuff. The football team was super conservative for so many years, and the rugby team was prone to bouts of conservatism. And then, these guys collected. Yeah, like pretty good. In fairness, I do think that we should make an accommodation with our defeats, and we need to think about how we deal with them and why we suffer them so often.
Let us know at home who you think the moment of the decade should be. You can vote now on Off the Ball. You can follow Aviva Ireland on Instagram and on Twitter and share your favourite Aviva Stadium memories using #SafeToDream. The final is coming up tomorrow morning from 7 a.m. It is going to be Robbie Henshaw's try against England versus Stockdale's try against New Zealand, unless the Clontarf Army comes to fruition and backs Brian O'Driscoll's record against England in 2011. So more on that on tomorrow morning's OTB AM. Right, Peter Smyth, Director of Research at Sport Ireland, is with us now at 8:44 on this Thursday morning. Peter, you're very welcome. How are things?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. A report released yesterday, I think, raised a lot of eyebrows. We all knew that people were exercising a lot at the moment. I don't think many of us were prepared for the fact that more adults in Ireland are exercising than ever before.
Yeah, we were somewhat surprised as well, I suppose. Just to give you some background, this is the second report we've done in the series since we've started to track participation in sport and recreational walking during the COVID crisis. And we've tracked it over since the end of February, over about 10 weeks now. And what we found is sort of pretty startling, and I think we've used the word unprecedented in terms of the level of activity. Let me give you a couple of examples of the scale of change that we're seeing. Just taking something like recreational walking, which is quite a stable measure. So we've been measuring sort of participation in recreational walking over the last sort of 15 years or so. And it rarely varies by more than 1% year on year. So last year, for example, between March and May, about 65% of the population were taking part in at least one recreational walk a week. That figure has now gone up to 83%. So that extra 17-18% is the equivalent of 650,000 extra walkers. With sport, obviously the scale is not quite as great, but we've seen the equivalent of about 250,000 people doing various activities. Now, you must remember this is at a time when we're essentially in lockdown in terms of facility access, in terms of formal sports activity. So club activity is gone. So this is all about people getting out, engaging in running, in cycling, in hill walking, in sort of exercise, so at-home exercise with online resources and so on. And the scale of the activity is as I say, is incredible. We also look at, for example, the fact that there are now about 10 percentage points of an increase in terms of the number of people who are taking part in both sport and recreational walking. So it's all good news, because I think the fact that people are getting out there and sort of looking after their health and well-being at a time of extraordinary change, I think is something that we should be thankful for.
What are the main reasons in terms of the psychology of the public for this? Is it a situation where people are looking to make themselves healthier? Is it a situation where people find that they just have more time? Is it a sense that people just want to get out of the house? Or have you managed to put your finger on why the pandemic has brought such a huge spike in these numbers?
I think you've hit a couple of the main reasons there. Mostly we find that in ordinary circumstances, one of the things that people describe as the barrier to them being active is time. And that's to do with time, whether it's in commute time, work time, time to look after family and so on. And clearly those set of circumstances have changed significantly in the current environment. The other issue there is that when we ask people what it is that makes them want to go out and be active, then the sort of things that they describe are health and well-being, looking after themselves, and also the social dimension. So it's not necessarily about things like competition or improving their athletic performance. It's really about sort of, health and well-being, and which is perhaps one of the reasons why we're seeing I think such a spike in female activity, because they tend to be perhaps better aware of their health and fitness and so on issues. And certainly at the moment, when we started measuring participation in sport about 15 years ago, the gap in participation between men and women in sport was about 15%. That gap has now disappeared in the current context.
Right, okay. And it's also interesting as well when you're breaking down the different demographics that the 15 to 24 age group appears to have the biggest spike if you're breaking it down into age. Like that's very interesting. Like, do you have a reason for that? Is it because perhaps with age comes a bit more wisdom and older people are just have been looking after themselves a bit better over the last couple of years? Or why do you think younger people are now taking this opportunity to get into exercise more than everybody else?
Well, I think it's always been the case that younger people have been more active in sport. So there is a decline in participation in sport with age. I think what we're seeing again for young people at the moment who may be more impacted in terms of their available time than other groups. But certainly it would appear to be the case that they're using that time well. So the numbers that are taking part in sport and in recreational walking among that age group are again, as I said, they're at unprecedented levels. The challenge, of course, will be when things start to perhaps go back to normal, whether we will get something of a relapse in terms of activity levels. And I think that's something perhaps that there are obviously opportunities for some of the sports bodies here, because if you look at the activities that are thriving at the moment, you can see running, cycling, exercise, hill walking, outdoor activities that in terms of the sort of flexibility of offerings to people, so you can do them on your own terms, in your own time, in your own way, at your own level. So there are certainly opportunities here for sports bodies perhaps to tap into what clearly is a huge latent demand for people to look after themselves.
Peter, these are phenomenal figures and really the type of thing that you would hope the Department of Health are pouring over to see what we can do as a society to try and, again, to make sure that gap, the gender gap in particular, never reopens. But also, if you think about the impact that this might have if it was to be maintained over a 5-year period or a 10-year period in the nation's health, it would save us billions, essentially, in a bunch of different ways, in the obesity crisis, diabetes, all sorts of other aspects that are going to have heart health, that are going to have a huge impact on our health system. The whole point out time, I think, is also fundamentally important here about how we change as a society to make sure that our people do have the opportunity to go out and have a half-hour walk or an hour walk every day, or at least every 2 days. That would involve better use of people working at home, which has an impact on rollout of rural broadband. It would also really help if we had more cycle lanes. Clearly, people want to cycle to work if that's going to be their exercise every day. So how hopeful are you that these figures actually start ringing massive alarm bells for policymakers and going, there's a big opportunity here now, right now, to mobilize the people who are out walking and out cycling and say, would you like a little bit more of this in your life? Well, then you need to do this, this, and this. And that we kind of start talking about this as a means of making Ireland a better place to live.
I'm hopeful in the extent that certainly the policy environment, I think, is very strongly positive towards the idea of sort of exercise and activity at the moment. If you think about even where we are in terms of what you were allowed out to do in the context of the current COVID crisis, exercise was one of the few things that you could do. So people in the policy system recognize its value and the contribution it makes to our health and well-being. I think also there's now a lot more discussion around the way in which we build our sort of cities and our environment. And you can see now where there's a lot of debate around the sort of opening up even of Dublin City in terms of making it more accessible to cyclists and so on. And obviously there are other sort of factors in that conversation, but I think it is good that we're seeing now that sort of that notion of having an environment that facilitates people in getting out and being active and doing something convenient, because most activity takes place near the home. Most activity, people sort of get out and walk in the local roads, or they cycle around their neighborhood or whatever. So it's that sort of easy option that we need to introduce. And that may also involve sort of changing the way in which we look at how people travel to and from work, and as you say, the ability to be able to work sort of remotely and so on, and not have to engage in long commutes. I think we need to also look at the way in which we sort of engage in our development of sporting infrastructure. Like, I think we need to move towards a sort of a multi-facility type of approach where a lot of activities are available to people at one locus, and that you can get families together doing different things and so on. So, yeah, I'm hopeful, because I think certainly there is a lot of energy and a lot of positive attitude towards this out there from certainly the conversations I'm having. a lot of people more engaged, a lot of different departments more engaged around the issue. And I think a recognition as well that, like you say, that the contribution to health, to well-being, to sort of savings, you must remember that as a society, we are aging considerably, and we know that activity tends to decline with age. So we have that challenge, that sort of force is acting against us. So, you know, we've got to get our act together, because we can't afford to continue to invest and plough money into sort of, you know, the health sort of treatment side of things. We've got to have a much more preventative approach to these things.
Can I ask you what you make then of the facilities that have been closed over the last while? How beneficial would it be for rugby clubs, for GAA clubs, for soccer pitches to be open as places where people could go for a walk? In some ways, this feels like it's a bit of a missed opportunity for some of those sports when their facilities are closed and people are crying out for a local facility. And certainly there's been a bubbling up of maybe resentment is too strong a word, but certainly opinion from columnists about opening pitches for at least the local community to be able to go in and walk there, if not play sport.
Yeah, I think the issue of access to facilities of all sorts has always been something, you know, I mean, I think of the idea of educational facilities over the years and so on. I'm not sure that I want to totally get into a debate about the rights and wrongs of that. Like, I mean, as I say, I think, like, I mean, if you think of the activities that people are engaging in at the moment, they seem to be able to do them irrespective of the fact that the sort of these facilities are shut down. So, like, I mean, the fact that, like, I mean, clearly now we have new people engaging in various activities like running and cycling and exercising and so on, and that didn't do it before. We have also people presumably who are transferring from other sports that have been closed off to them. So I think what we're seeing is a fact that people will find a way to do things if they have the particular sort of limiting factor is this issue of time and their sort of notion of the time available to them. And, I mean, one of the interesting things that I found, actually just looking at the data again this morning, we looked at, you know, a group, for example, like the 35 to 44-year-old group, and we asked a question, or there was a question asked in the survey about whether or not there were children under 18 in the household. And we found that where there were children in the household, those 35 to 44-year-olds were more likely to be more active than where there weren't. Now, my reading of this, and it's an inference that I'm making, is that, like, I mean, these are probably parents talking about their own children, and that it's parents who are now probably engaging with their children, but also having the opportunity to get out on their own. So I think there's a lot of good stuff here. And one of the things we're doing is we're going to expand the survey over the next 3.5 months. So as the country opens up, we're going to sort of look to see how these patterns of activity change, not just overall, but also among different groups. So we're looking at, for example, people working in different sectors of society and when these sectors start to open up. And we're looking obviously at the aspects of social participation in sport as well downstream. So we'll be looking at things like volunteering and membership and attendance at events. And we'll be looking at sort of much more around the sort of the levels of activity and so on. So there'll be a lot of interesting stuff, I think, emerging over the next few months around this particular tracking exercise that we're engaged in.
We spent an hour with Philip Browne yesterday. The piece is about to broadcast just after 9 o'clock, and he's talking about the existential threat that clubs face. And he actually mentioned volunteers. And number one, he talks about the difficulty of starting a new club. Very, very difficult to do. So you need to protect the ones that are there and not let them go. But volunteers, for example, who might have been running teams and spending their time in the past making sandwiches, washing kits, lining pitches, cutting grass, all of a sudden they're finding that actually they want to go out and have a cycle or go for a run or spend more time with their kids, because that's what the habit that they've got into over the last 10 weeks. And it will be very interesting to see if those people actually do end up going back to doing the level of volunteerism that they did in the past. I just wanted to mention one point, though, because I fall into that demographic that you were just talking about there. We have 3 kids who we are getting out and making sure that they're getting exercise every day, because otherwise they go completely crazy if we don't actually get them out for a run. But, you know, on a personal level, you notice that Yeah, exactly. And so as a result, I'm also going out every day for a cycle. And it's been noticeable, 5 weeks ago, the roads were completely empty and it was safe and you could cycle away and there was never any sense of any fear about the cars. That fear is coming back because the cycle lanes are very busy and the roads are getting much busier. And we actually don't really have the cycling infrastructure for the amount of people, it seems, who want to do it. So you would hope that the policymakers are looking at this going, actually, if we invest loads of money in cycle lanes, people are going to use them.
No, I totally agree with you. The area I live in myself, up in Sandyford, there's some little country roads, and I can notice when I'm out running that the traffic is becoming a challenge because, again, this idea of trying to maintain a physical distancing, which people are doing, to be fair. I think most people are making an effort, but obviously sometimes it pushes you out onto a road, which, if the traffic starts to build up, it will be a little more dangerous and and some people wear headphones and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I hope we don't start to see any emerging incidents around that. And I hope people obviously stay safe and stay conscious of the fact that the traffic is building up while still maintaining their levels of activity. But I think on the other point you made about the volunteering, certainly I would agree. I know a number of people who I've spoken to who are, as it were, committed volunteers over the years that would have been involved in all of those aspects of the club. And they have said exactly what you were saying there, that they have had the opportunity now to sort of, to tone all that down, to concentrate a little bit more on themselves, to get out and get active. And suddenly they find that they have been fitter. And it will be a very interesting question as to whether or not, the habits that they're forming now will become so ingrained that maybe it would be challenged to re-engage with that volunteering. Yeah. As I say, that's something we will be looking at as we go forward with this survey over the next sort of 3.5 months or so.
Listen, Peter, the figures are very encouraging. Thanks a million for popping on and taking your call this morning.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Peter Smyth there, Director of Research with Sport Ireland. Right, it is 9:01 on this Thursday morning on OTB AM, the Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball. If you've missed anything from the show this morning, you'll be able to get it back on our YouTube channel or on the OTB AM podcast stream. We timestamp every 2-hour show, so you can jump through to whatever part of the show you're looking for. Also, just to let you know that over the weekend, as episode 2 of the Lance Armstrong documentary airs on ESPN, we're going to be dropping some really important interviews into our highlights from Off the Ball podcast stream. So you're going to be able to hear interviews with Betsy Andreu, David Walsh, Emma O'Reilly, as well as many more from our coverage over Lance Armstrong over the past 18 years of OTB, as well as our Tyler Hamilton interview, of course, from OTB AM this week. You can hear our piece from 2018 as well when he joined us in studio for a fascinating chat, and you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Right, I think we've got Darren Cleary on the line. How are you, Darren? Good morning to you. We don't have Darren on the line. We'll be back right after these.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
OTB Sports Radio.
This Sunday on OTB Sports Radio, we're bringing you an exclusive first listen of a special interview with Muhammad Ali's former business manager, Ger GIlroy. The last survivor from Ali's inner circle joined myself, Sheahan, Hannon, for an hour full of great insight and never before told stories.
He gets out of the car, the cop said, "Where do you think you're going?" He said, "I'm looking for Joe Fraser. Where's Joe Fraser?"
Hear it first this bank holiday Sunday at 7 p.m, exclusively on OTB Sports Radio. Listen on offtheball.com or download the Go Loud app.
OTB AM.
With Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.
Okay, let's give that one more go. Darren Cleary, our former colleague here at OTB Tower, is now Speaker Director at Web Summit. How are you getting on?
Good morning, Eoin. How are you?
Very well. How's lockdown been treating you?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. It's got a bit like Groundhog Day, but everyone is safe and well and healthy, which is the most important thing.
How does it transform a business like Web Summit?
Yeah, I think similar enough to sport and any kind of live events, we probably had to pivot towards online, and that's what we're doing with our next event. It was due to be in Toronto June 22nd to 25th. Obviously, a physical gathering with 30,000 people is not a runner in the current climate. So we've changed. We're going to go completely online. It's going to be completely remote. And we're going to hope to bring the same show we would, except where the only difference is we won't be bringing 30,000 people together in one physical place. We'll be bringing 30,000 people together from all over the world.
So this is basically becoming Collision from Home. Instead of Collision Conference, it's Collision from Home, where people all around the world, I guess this completely broadens your scope for getting people to actually engage with the content. The factor of travel is no longer a factor.
Yeah, diaries are the trickiest thing, because the people we bring to our event, certainly from a speaker perspective, are some of the most high-grade leaders in the world from their various companies. So calendars are always tricky to coordinate, but when you have that nature of it being remote, it opens up a lot of possibilities, particularly for me. I work mainly with the sports people and bringing them to the event, and trying to work with active and retired sports people to find even a day in their calendar is tricky. So getting them to a different city and sometimes to a different country is not an easy task. So this kind of removes those barriers. It makes it much more logistically possible, and we've managed to assemble a really strong lineup as a result.
Who have you got on the lineup so far?
Who have you got, Darren?
Well, we've got a decent one so far. We've got Shaq coming, and I think it's a little bit different to some of the interviews Shaq does, and even his own podcast. He's going to be talking about unemployment in America, and it's something he's really passionate about. He's an advocate and an investor in a gig economy platform called Steady. So he's coming to talk about basically what they're going to do to try and help get people back to work. This talk of mass unemployment in America, 20 million people have lost their jobs. So I guess it's Shaq like you've never seen him before. We've one big announcement that we're making this morning here on OTB AM, and it's our final sports speaker for Collision from Home. And it's one of the, certainly a man you'd probably put on your Mount Rushmore of NFL. It's the Gronk. Rob Gronkowski is coming to Collision from Home.
Class. This is an exclusive announcement we can bring you this morning on OTB AM. Rob Gronkowski and a family as well, I understand?
Rob Gronkowski and his 4 brothers, Gordy, Dan, Chris and Glenn. We've got the Gronkowski's Guide to Building a Brand at Collision from Home this year. And the man who is usually sitting next to you, Eoin, but due to social distance protocols probably isn't, Ger GIlroy, will be the man trying to moderate what will be Collision from Home's Brady Bunch.
You buried the lead, Darren. You got Ger GIlroy to actually sign up to an online conference. That is incredible work. I didn't even realise that Gronk had a load of brothers. And this is actually going to be really interesting in terms of how do you actually build that brand, like this thing that has become such...
No. What's going to be more interesting is how the hell do you interview 5 people all at once, especially when they're as wild as the Gronkowski.
That's the question. Are you officially the person who directs Ger on how to conduct this thing, Darren, or how does this work?
I'll try, but to be honest, like Ger touched on there, it's very, very difficult to direct 5 gregarious brothers who all came from a sporting background and probably are all messers when they get together, even if it's on an online hangout link or a Zoom conference. It can be a bit tricky, but the funny thing about them is they're accomplished business builders, and they all kind of meddled in sport. I mean, 4 of the brothers played in NFL or were on NFL rosters, and then the oldest brother was also on a Major League Baseball roster. So they're really accomplished sports people, but they've continued their life kind of away from sport. And they all have their various brands that they're going to tell us about. And what's interesting about them is they all kind of work collaboratively. It's very much a family organization. And without trying to make a joke about it, it is a bit Brady Bunch. They do work together very closely, and they have kind of built a brand that stretches right across the family. Ger's just lucky that we don't have the mom and dad as well.
Darren, tell us again how people can get involved, how people can sign up, and when this thing is happening.
Yeah, so it's happening the 22nd to the 25th of June. Tickets still available, collisionconf.com. And yeah, get involved. It's not just going to be about the great speaker zone. It's also those meaningful connections that people make at large events. There's some really interesting things in the works to ensure that people can network in the same way, even if they can't be in the same room. So yeah, check it out, collisionconf.com.
That has always been the great success story of Web Summit, is the meetings between people, the opportunity for small businesses to actually have a bit of face time, and that's still going to happen, despite the fact that it's a remote conference.
That's the plan, exactly, and it makes a big difference to people because their time is much better managed. They can kind of connect with who they want to connect to. Well, at an event floor, you kind of connect with who wants to come up to you. So it's a much more, I guess, measured way of networking, and the hope is that the connections people make at it will be much more valuable because they have time to plan them out and map them out ahead in advance. And we have software that will help kind of support their ability to connect.
Right, nice one. Well, very best of luck with it, Darren. Hope it's a raging success as ever. Good luck to you. Good luck to Ger as well, interviewing Rob Gronkowski. Cheers, Darren.
Cheers, Owen. Cheers, Ger.
It's just coming up to 10 minutes past 9 this morning on OTB AM. It's been a really busy show so far. We've caught up with Stephen McGuinness of the PFAI about the return of football a little earlier, and heard from Peter Smyth of Sport Ireland about the explosion of recreational activity over the past few weeks in Ireland. Up next, though, we're bringing you the latest episode of State of the Union with Keith Wood, and we're delighted to say we caught up with IRFU CEO Philip Browne for an hour to discuss the future of rugby in Ireland.
OTB's State of the Union with Keith Wood.
Right, you're very welcome along to episode 4 of Keith Wood's State of the Union. This is the show where we grapple with the very future of the game. We've been around the world so far at Michael Check and Andrew Mertens on last week, but it's much closer to home this week, and I'm delighted to say we're joined by Philip Browne, the Chief Executive of the IRFU. Philip, how are you getting on?
We're doing all right. It's like everyone else, trying to adjust to the new normal. So IRFU is working remotely for the last nearly 10 weeks. And so like many other people, it's just getting used to it.
Yeah, it definitely takes a little while to get used to. Keith, this is the part of the show where I hand over and you kind of set the table for what the discussion is going to be like over the next hour. What do you want to talk to Philip about?
Yeah, hiya Philip, how are you doing? Look, we're taking the time during lockdown to explore the game we love, I suppose, an off-the-ball discovery of some of the issues surrounding the game, a rough look at the finances and how they work, a look at how situations elsewhere in the world have an impact on Irish provincial and international games. We also want to have a little look at the domestic game and where that fits in. And I think if we were to kind of break it back to before COVID, how would you have said that the finances of the game were before this crisis happened?
I think we would have been in a fairly good place, to be honest. I mean, professional rugby at the best of times is a marginal business. But we were effectively making sure that we washed our face in terms of the professional game, and more than that, we were producing a dividend which went back into the amateur game. Because at the end of the day, that's the rationale behind all of this. There's no point being involved in the professional game just for the sake of it as a rugby union. It's to generate the funds to support the grassroots game. So we were in a good place. We had sold Newlands last year, and the proceeds of that were used to purchase the office building that we operate out of in Lansdowne Road, and we were saving about 600,000-700,000 in rent, and that money was being pumped directly into the amateur game. The international game and the attendances at the Aviva Stadium were second to none. We were managed to, over the last number of years, fill nearly every game by good pricing and good marketing, and obviously the good performance of the national team obviously helps as well. And at provincial level, it was working well as for them as well. Albeit, having said that, we just about wash our face.
Yeah, it is at provincial level. It becomes incredibly tight, and the finances are always very, very tight. Can you explain the sort of pressure that we're under to deal with the salaries because of what happens overseas?
The 70 miles of water between us and the UK is really important, because that's it is a disincentive for players to some extent to actually move away from their family, their support networks, and all the rest of it. And you'll know more about that than me, Keith. But the reality is that the market in the UK, well, in England specifically, and the market in France were certainly very buoyant. I think the market in the UK probably tailed off somewhat in the last probably 12 months, plateaued. Market in France for cachet players is still very buoyant. The other market that's emerged really over the last number of months or last 6-12 months has been Japan. It was always there, very attractive for South Africans, a lot of South Africans there, quite a few New Zealanders and Australians, but we're now beginning to see a move from Europe across to Japan in terms of some of the English players have started to move across, and that's obviously a very buoyant market indeed. We've always taken pride in the fact that we put the players first, player welfare. We look after their training loads, their playing loads, and that and the 70 miles of water between us and the UK are really of a great advantage to us.
Do you think that the Saracens' huge overspend and their breaches, do you think that that had an impact across the game in Europe? Did that force other unions or other clubs to have to pay more to keep their players?
I certainly think in the UK it had an impact. France and the market in France is pretty self-contained, and they do their own thing. It probably had some impact in terms of some of our cachet players here in Ireland, in that certainly there was a player inflation, wage inflation over the last 18 months. But we've always taken a view that we know what we can pay, and we don't go beyond that. And if someone ultimately wants to move for money, we can't stand in their way.
If we look back at the pre-COVID period of time, would you have said that model in Ireland was a sustainable model?
I think it was, yeah. I think it, very much so. It's effectively the national team was subsidising the provinces, and also subsidising the amateur game. So as long as we can continue to do that, and that the values generated by the national team were right up there, I think we were in a sustainable situation. We also moved with David Nucifora coming in, a lot more emphasis and a lot more money has been spent on the pathways. So we were starting to see the fruits of that, really, in terms of young players coming through into the professional game in a better state of preparation, both physically, mentally, and in terms of their awareness of the game itself. So, and I suppose the evidence of that was the under-20 team this year, and the unbeaten in the Six Nations. Unfortunately, we're missing the tail end of that. But we've had a good record with under-20s over the last couple of years.
And just a slightly retrospective thing, because you've been at the helm pretty much the whole time of professional rugby. I remember you there in the amateur days that we were both there at the same time. Would you have done anything differently? Or would you have liked to have seen rugby have done something differently in that period of time?
In hindsight's a wonderful thing. Maybe we should have been a bit braver at the start of the professional game. We ended up in a situation where most of the national team in the late 90s were actually based in England, and that wasn't you've been one of them. And I mean, yes, at the end of the day, that probably was not as we should have been maybe a little braver at that stage. Having said that, I think there were advantages in not being first mover. I think we were able to see the mistakes that others had made. And when we did embrace professionalism after the 1999 World Cup, I mean, I think that was a real eye-opener. We effectively said, listen, we're either in the game or we're going to be trailing in the wake of everyone else. And you can't be half professional in a professional game. And there's, as I've said before on many occasions, there's no reward in professional sport for mediocrity. And I think that would have been maybe one of your own views as well at the time. And we would have had discussions about that at the time. So, we embraced it. And by embracing it, I think, we managed to get to where we are. I think by and large, yeah, there's some things we could have done better. There always is. But I wouldn't have changed that much, to be honest.
If the current crisis hadn't happened, what were the expansion plans? What was the ambition to improve the pathway so that your player base widens and actually you just become self-sufficient even if players do move away? Or were you looking to expand into other markets? What was the future of the club system, the provincial system, and the international team?
Well, one of the first things that David Nucifora observed when he came here 5 years ago was that we really hadn't put the resources into the pathway that needed to be put in. And it's really about putting the supports around the individuals at provincial level. And those supports being medical, strength conditioning, and then the rugby supports in terms of the tactical and getting an understanding of the game. So I think, we have put quite a bit of additional monies over the last 3 years, 4 years into that whole area. There's still some work to be done on some of the academies. They probably aren't quite as effective as they should be. But the reality is the greatest thing we have going for us is a throughput of talent coming into the system, because otherwise you're reliant on holding on to players in a European market and potentially a global market. And that is not a sustainable situation really for anyone to be in. You need to have the pressure coming up from underneath, so that if players do wish to go abroad, that's fine, but we have plenty of good players coming up behind them. And that, I think, has been a focus of David's work and a focus of the work of the National Professional Game Board over the last number of years. In terms of the wider scheme of things, Pro 14, we obviously want to make Pro 14 a competition that's recognisable on an international stage. And to be fair, I think it is. It probably has as many international players playing in the Pro 14 as certainly Super Rugby, and more internationals playing in the Pro 14 than there would be in PRL or indeed the top 14. So the quality of the rugby is actually good. You guys, Keith, you can be a better judge of that than possibly me. But I think the quality has improved immeasurably, and it's really about reaching out to new markets. CVC and the deal with CVC is very much about reaching out to new markets. It's about trying to tap into the experience and the marketing new and the sports marketing experience of CVC to try and build the Pro 14 as a brand and build it as an attractive proposition.
Philip, are you nervous about having a private equity company coming in? Are they essential partners to the game now?
I think they're essential partners to the game. I think we're very comfortable that the deal between CVC and the Pro 14 is actually a deal with each of the unions involved, who are the shareholders of the Pro 14. So it's quite different to the sort of deal that would have been done with PRL, which was a deal really with the club owners. So from our point of view, we're satisfied we put the protections into the arrangements with CVC that ensures that the control of the game, the way in which the game develops, the laws of the game, the regulations, all of that lies 100% with the unions.
And could you see a possibility of where, because CVC are in the Premier League or the Premiership and in the Pro 14, that they could have an amalgamation, or it could try and change the structure? Is that something that could be on the tables to be maybe a more potent competition?
Well, I think the answer is I don't know, and I think CVC need to get their feet under the table and work with Pro 14, work with PRL, work with EPCR, because effectively they have a major influence now in terms of the European club competitions. And I think the fact that we have a shared stakeholders between PRL, Pro 14, with influence in EPCR, I think it will help put a fair degree of shape on how the European professional game develops in the future. And I think that's probably a good thing. I think we've always had disparate views between the unions and jurisdictions as to how the professional game should develop, what it should look like. And I think having an independent party, for want of a better term, sitting in with a vested interest themselves will help, I think, bring about, I would hope, a greater degree of coherence in the professional game in Europe. And I think that'll be a great benefit, not only to European rugby, but to world rugby.
There was a lot of conversation on the previous chats that we've had, and we've talked to people all over the world, and You mentioned it at one stage that one of the key components for the IRFU is their ability to manage game time, to manage the amount of minutes that a player plays, to pretty much manage the length of their season, and to have that level of control. And yet everything else that seems to come out of World Rugby or any of the club owners or different unions is, well, if we can have another competition, if we could play a world final, a club final, maybe we could have a World Cup, the equivalent of that every year. Can we amalgamate everything else in? It seems as if there's too much rugby going on, being stretched far too much, and I don't know where that sits with player welfare.
Yeah, and that's been part of the problem over the last 15 years or more. I've been involved in discussions for 15 years in various shapes and guises as to what the world or the global season should look like. And one of the frustrating things is that because everyone has disparate views and everyone has vested interests in terms of holding on to what they have, and we'd be the same as anyone else in terms of the Six Nations in that regard, I'd have to say, but it becomes very difficult to actually change things. And unfortunately, compromise always seems to be on player welfare, which is just an unsustainable position. And we would be very, very strong on making sure that the players are not overpaid, or at least in a centralized system like we have, we can at least manage the playing time and the training load. But this notion that the top players in the world are going to play every game in a club season plus international rugby is simply not. It's not tenable, and I think that's the biggest issue. Is that the easy answer is let's have another fixture, and we'll get more money. I think there's less is more, and quality over quantity is something that you'd like to think would work, but that requires the cooperation of everyone across the board, the club game, the international game. It also requires the cooperation of sponsors and broadcasters, and at times it's hard to corral all of those different entities into the one space and moving in the same direction. And to be fair, I think that's what we're trying to do at the moment. I think the COVID-19 crisis has, given us a spur on in terms of, listen, can we just try and see if we can get this to work? So SANZAR and Six Nations, as you know, are meeting to try and tease all of this out. I think part of the problem in the past is, we've had too many people, too many cooks in the room. I think if we just have a small group looking at it, maybe we can move things on. Having said that, the challenges are significant, and it'll be, I think player welfare has always been one of the big issues and one of the hurdles that we've had difficulty in getting over.
If the Six Nations and SANZAR are sitting in the room, are the French clubs representatives there, or the English clubs?
No, I think effectively what we're going to do is there's a working group between SANZAR and Six Nations looking at this, how the structure of the international season would look like. And I think now we're moving into a stage where there's going to be a greater level of engagement with all the other stakeholders. Obviously the clubs in France and England, Pro 14, Super Rugby, all have to be involved. The players obviously have to be consulted as well. So we're now at a point where we're going out to a wider stakeholder engagement with some potential options. I think it's a work in progress, and I'd say there's a bit of water to go under the bridge yet.
It sounds like for the first time, though, that you're genuinely hopeful we might have a global calendar. I thought those comments towards the end of last week were the strongest I've seen from anybody in one of the leadership roles for any of the unions about, look, there is a big opportunity here with the crisis to have a global calendar that actually works for everybody.
Yeah, well, as they always say, never waste a good crisis. So I think it's the right time to look at it. There's a lot of other stuff going on which has been pretty revolutionary, I suppose, in the conservative world of rugby. And I think the Project Light, which is the Six Nations project to effectively aggregate all their TV rights across the autumn internationals and the Six Nations, has been a move in the right direction. And I think to to take that a step further is to aggregate the rights of incoming tours, outgoing tours, and try and see if by aggregating rights that you can actually generate a greater level of interest from broadcasters, with the possibility of maybe doing some sort of OTT channel, which effectively gives all the rugby punters, for want of a better term, a one-stop shop for rugby. Because at the moment, the difficulty has been that if you want to watch international rugby, in the autumn, you could be looking at it on 3 different channels. You could be watching 2 games at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot as a sport. So it's trying to put some shape and coherence in things, and I think that whole project was a step in that direction. And I think this work on looking at seeing if we can align the global season a little bit better is another obvious step to take.
One of the points that comes up, especially for the autumn internationals, is a little bit of the envy that happens from the Southern Hemisphere teams, because when they come up and play in the Northern Hemisphere, we fill out our stadia, we reap the benefits of that. They don't derive any income from that, is that correct?
No, they don't, but they derive income from the tours when we tour in the Southern Hemisphere, and they also derive income every 4 years from the Lions tour, which is huge. So the sort of international rugby economy is not as unbalanced as some would lead you to believe.
Mind you, the ticket price that you'll get in the Aviva could be 3 or 4 times what you might get in Dunedin. True,
but I mean, the reality is a Lions tour can generate 40 million, 50 million for the host union. So, when you add it all up, the rugby economy is not as unbalanced as people would maintain. Having said that, you can go and watch Ireland play New Zealand in Auckland, and the top ticket price might be 40 quid, whereas the top price here in Dublin might be 100 quid. So you're right, there's a difference in terms of pricing, there's a difference in terms of the market economies, but equally there's a difference in terms of the way in which the game is run and the cost base of the game in Europe. Player salaries are obviously much more significant up in Europe. Equally, for a lot of the nations in Europe, we've had to build our own stadia and invest in our own stadia, and that's not the case in Australia or New Zealand. I mean, the best option is obviously just simply to rent a stadium. You don't have the headache of trying to keep it running, trying to make it wash its face. So it's complicated, and you can listen to some people and they would maintain it's very simple. Southern Hemisphere countries need to get a share of the revenues up here. Well, maybe they should also take a share of the costs as well.
It's funny because Michael Cheika was actually wishing that they had their own stadium and citing Ireland as an example. So it seems grass is always greener no matter which hemisphere you're in. But what would the benefit of a unified season actually be? Why would it help Northern Hemisphere, and why would it help Ireland to have a calendar year where, say, the Six Nations was pushed back a month and the Rugby Championship happened at the same time?
Well, I think it's not so much a help for Ireland in that at the end of the day, we're in control of our players. It's really in those countries where there isn't the same level of control, and particularly England. And I think if you can decouple the club season from the international season, it becomes much easier for the clubs to have clarity as to how they play or how they structure their competitions, and knowing when they have their players. For us, it's different in that we can control our players in terms of when they play and when they train. So it's from our point of view, it's a case of, well, if this is the way that the rest of the rugby world wants to move, we shouldn't stand in the way of it. But I think probably the big advantage for us is by getting some sort of cohesion and coherence across the game. It will increase the value of the game for sponsors, broadcasters, and ultimately, hopefully, the rugby public as well.
That's exactly what CBC did with Formula One before ultimately selling it out to Liberty Global. They relaxed all of their media rules. Bernie Ecclestone used to not let people do any video. Even the team members themselves couldn't have their phones with them to film stuff. Bernie Ecclestone shut it down straight away. So when CBC came in, apparently the Formula One team didn't actually know how to tweet properly or upload video to YouTube. It was a huge learning experience for them, but it massively increased the interest and access that people had. And you could see the knock-on benefit for everybody. CBC have been, in many cases, painted as this rampaging, villainous capitalist force who are going to come in and slash rugby and, make a profit and leave. But in many ways, what they've done is they've forced the unions to work with each other with a long-term view and a plan to try and give value back to the investors in CBC, but also to do that with a coherency. I can certainly see the benefit of these unions all coming together and going, well, what is our shared vision for the future of the game?
Yeah, well, I think you're right, Gerald. I mean, they're a catalyst, really, and in terms of bringing people together, using their experience, particularly in the digital space, because I mean that's where rugby really needs to work hard. And to be fair, we've got a good digital program in the IRFU. It's probably second to none, certainly in this country, and across world rugby, it's probably right up there. But having said that, we're still in the halfpenny place compared to some other sports. And I think it's about using CBC as a catalyst to actually launch rugby to up the next rung of the ladder of professional sport, because we simply can't continue to operate on the basis of being dependent on the number of people we get through the stadium door and the ticket price that we charge. I mean, there's a limit to that. In the case of the Aviva Stadium, it's 51,000. That's as big as it gets. You can't make it any bigger. And there's only so much elasticity in ticket pricing that the public will bear. So we have to find new and additional sources of revenue. And certainly that whole digital space is where we believe there's a new turn.
Sorry, Ger. In relation to the English Premiership, there was conversations in the last couple of weeks about increasing the salary cap or making certain the marquee players still go. That seems to try and push it back up again. Do you think there'll be a stabilising in the UK?
I don't think they have any choice, to be honest. It's not a club rugby in England in the PRL is not sustainable outside of one or two clubs. They've managed to wash their face. They're well organised and they have a good business model. A lot of the clubs are dependent on individual owners pumping money into the clubs, and that works for a while as long as there's someone there who's willing to pump money into the club. But if they decide that it's a choice between going to the rugby club that I own every second week or my yacht in the Med, and it's a choice between the two, and they choose the yacht in the Med, well, sure, there may be another owner to step in, but it's not a sustainable business, really. And the values, commercial values, just simply aren't there. And I think that the difficulty has been that there's been an arms race, for want of a better term, between some of the clubs in England and around player salaries, and it just simply there's got to be some sort of a cap there. Otherwise, it's going to destroy the PRL as a in terms of sporting integrity and as a competition.
Like if we go back to 25 years, and you said you were slow out of the blocks in terms of professionalising the game in Ireland, so were the RFU, and we had their former commercial director on a couple of weeks ago, and so we were having a discussion about that, and the RFU were slow out of the blocks. The owners in the Premiership have put themselves into an incredibly strong position, albeit they're losing multi-millions every year, but they're in a very strong power position. Do you think there's any chance or opportunity for them to blend back in with the RFU again? Do you think there's a common purpose or common ground for them?
It's a good question. I think the horse is bolted on that one. I don't think it'll be possible for the IRFU to effectively move to a situation like we have. And I mean, I'd love to claim that we were prescient and it was all, good business management and all the rest of that. We ended up in a situation where we held the player contracts. The fact of the matter is there was no club in Ireland capable of the financial resource, or would have to have the financial resources to actually put a professional game in place. Whereas in England, it's obviously different. Individuals with large amounts of disposable income, and there are many of them in the UK, who are prepared to do so. I think trying to put that genie back in the bottle and trying to move back to centralised contracts in the UK will be very difficult. It may well be that they'll move possibly to a situation where they control a squad of players who would make up their international squad, which is kind of a halfway house. And to some extent they've gone partway down that road, but that's probably as good as it will get. The other interesting thing is this, and it's uniquely it's European in some respects. This notion that you can have open competitions with promotion and relegation, and that if it's not an open competition with promotion and relegation, there really isn't a competition at all, and it's of no interest to anyone. The fact of the matter is the best professional sports in the world are all closed leagues, where you are able to effectively invest in your competition, invest in your facilities, invest in the infrastructure and the players. I think Pro 14 we're in a position where we can do that and have been able to do that. And I think one of the difficulties with the PRL and Top 14 to some extent as well is the fear in the middle of the table that you could drop out, and if you drop out, you might never get back up again, and it becomes quite tricky running a professional sport at what is really its infancy. I mean, professional rugby is in its infancy, but if in a situation where you can't invest properly because of the fear of relegation, it really doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. AFL, NBA, the NFL, they're all closed leagues, and they're the successful professional sports.
I know we're jumping around a little bit, but I'm reacting to some of the things you said. So you talk about the Six Nations, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about whether there would be a relegation for the last team. Look, I'm not in favour of that myself either. But what I would say is that Italy have had 20 years in the Six Nations, and it hasn't really worked out well for them. They've their game hasn't radically improved. They're always in the bottom two within it. Is there any chance of them dropping out of it altogether, and a team maybe along the similar timeline as South Africa, same timeline as us, might pop in instead?
Well, I think the reality, Italian rugby has struggled for a number of reasons, and one is I don't think they're particularly well organised, and I think Conor O'Shea and his appointment, they actually have started to turn things around, and you can see that in the results at Treviso, and it's just going to take a little bit of time, and you may well ask, well, how much more time? But I think the whole issue of relegation in the Six Nations is, and again, it was put about that it was around the fear of Ireland and Scotland and other unions that you might get relegated and that there was too much jeopardy. Well, the jeopardy really is the professional sport. I mean, we generate the money that we generate from the Six Nations actually funds professional sport and professional rugby. It also funds the amateur game. To get relegated, the first thing that would happen is we would probably, if we ended up going into a second-tier competition, playing Georgia, Russia, Spain, Portugal, Germany, the reality is we would probably have to shed 2 professional teams immediately because of the impact it would have on our finances. And in those circumstances, what you're actually doing is, instead of stabilizing the game or improving the game, you're actually destabilizing the game and possibly disimproving the game. And so it becomes existential. And so that the reality is, if you lose, for us to lose a team, or for Italy to lose 2 teams through relegation, it would be almost impossible to put it back together again. So what we have to try and do is preserve what we have, as opposed to trying to look over the fence and say, well, the far-off fields are greener. But the fact of the matter is, Georgia are always touted as, you know, the possible team to come in instead of Italy. Italy have beaten Georgia on numerous occasions, and the record is there. You know, I think I don't think you'd be getting a massive improvement by bringing in Georgia. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to try and improve Georgia and improve the other European teams, and that's very much part and parcel of what the Six Nations need to do, along with Rugby Europe and World Rugby, is try and improve things. But you know, at this point in time, you know, that's probably down the agenda. Survival is really the name of the game at the moment.
What about the notion of South Africa playing in our time zone and maybe being added to in a new calendar, a new rugby calendar? Is that even a discussion at any point?
I don't think well, certainly it hasn't been a discussion as far as I've been concerned. I know that lots of people discuss lots of things, and there's lots of chat about this and about that. But I mean, at the moment, they play in Super Rugby, they play in the Rugby Championship, and as far as I know, there's contracts in place for the continuation of that. And so, but I mean, you know, at the moment, you know, 2 years could be a long time in rugby, or a long time in sport, given where we are at the moment. So who knows what might happen in the future.
Philip, if we go to that now, do you see rugby going to be changed drastically? Do you see it down to being 10-a-side, 7-a-side for a period of time? How are competitions going to be started, both in a professional and a domestic sense?
Yeah, well, in the amateur game, I think we'll probably end up starting with the short forms of the game. It makes perfect sense that we do that. And in fact, the short forms of the game might also happen in the professional game. The sevens rugby is probably an easier sell to public health authorities than the 15-a-side game. Having said that, the finance of the entire game is dependent on 15-a-side rugby being played in full houses at club level and full houses at international level. And unless we can get back to that position, I think there's going to be a real problem for rugby as a sport. It's very easy to switch everything off. It's much harder to switch it back on again. We've submitted detailed return to train, return to play, and event management protocols to the Sport Ireland's expert group, and effectively we've driven a stake into the ground, I suppose, of saying we have to have some target to aim for. We're aiming for the 22nd of August to start up a set of interprovincial derbies as part of the tail end of the Pro 14 season, and we play them in a controlled environment in the Aviva Stadium. And that unless we have that stake in the ground, it becomes very difficult to plan for anything. So we have laid out how we're going to do it, and it's best practice from various sports from around the world, and of course best practice is changing all the time, because as we get the experience of what happens in Bundesliga and other sports which have come back into play, we'll probably inevitably end up changing how we do things. But at least we have a plan. We have a date, and one would hope that the government and NEFIT and Department of Health will look at those seriously. And if they don't like it, they need to come back and tell us why they don't like it. And then we try and change it. And we need to work with the government and with the health authorities to try and make it happen. And I don't think simply no is not a good enough answer. We need to understand why, if it is going to be no, why is it no, and what can we change to make it happen. But certainly the rugby economy is dependent on people coming through gates and watching matches, and on broadcasters and on sponsorship. And in particular, I think for the big international matches, if we don't move back to a position where we have full houses, or we can get spectators through the styles, pretty soon we're all going to be, all the major rugby unions are going to be in difficulty.
Would you be looking in terms of a government subsidy until that happens?
I think we may have to. The reality is, we're not the only sport in this position. I mean, the GAA are in the same position. The FAI are in the same position. They're dependent on the big matches generating the revenues, which support the multiplicity of activities that go on in their sports and at club level. And so they're in exactly the same boat. And as I say, it's easy to switch it all off. It's much harder to switch it back on again. And if you lose an NGB, or if you start losing clubs, at that stage it becomes very difficult to put it all back together again.
Are you concerned that that might happen, that we could be close enough to that happening?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said earlier, professional sport is a marginal business. We don't bank huge reserves. We spend the money we earn in terms of keeping 4 professional teams going, keeping the national team going, keeping the women's team going, sevens teams going, and also supporting the amateur club game to the tune of about 10, 11 million euro a year. So it's not as if there's reserves. There aren't. We spend the money we earn, and we're a not-for-profit organisation, and so the reality is, the cash is limited. Yes, you could go off and borrow, but there's nobody should get engaged in borrowing funds unless they have some idea as to how they're going to repay them. And at this point in time, I have no idea how we would repay any debt we took on.
In terms of how a government subsidy might work, would you be hoping that would be a grant, or even if it was a long-term loan, that the government were the ultimate backstop or guarantors on at a reasonable interest rate? Have you had those conversations with the government yet?
Yeah, we're having conversations around the margins. I mean, to be honest, the first number of weeks really have been trying to deal with the immediate impact of the crisis, and I think those conversations is now the natural next stage, which is to talk about, well, where are we going to end up if we cannot start up sport again in a meaningful way? And I think there'll be a fair degree of anxiety amongst all the major sports, and not just the major sports, all sport, as to how are we going to restart. And if we can't restart, what are the implications? And the implications for society are significant. The field sports in particular provide organised sport for hundreds of thousands of kids, and it is not something that any society would want to lose, because if you do not effectively ingrain sport and activity with kids at a young age, you're building up a real problem later on in life for the health system, with people who are not active. And so sport has a value. It just doesn't have a value just in that context. It has a value in terms of cohesion of society and coherence. And I think all of those things mean the sport has a value, leaving aside the employment in sport. So I think to be fair to government and Sport Ireland, I think they understand that. How they're going to deal with it is another matter, because there's a lot of hungry mouths out there across all sectors of society and across all sectors of business. So it's an unenviable task for government, but they do need to understand that sport, it's existential for some sports.
Philip, if you look at what would be palatable, I think, to everybody, it would be that domestic game and that, the amount of kids that play rugby and all the benefits that they get from that. I think they could understand the subsidy there. I think that would be much harder for professional players. Are pay cuts on the horizon for our professional group?
Well, we've already imposed with their agreement. Impose is the wrong word. With the agreement of the players, we have a salary deferral scheme in place, and so we're in the second month of that. But I mean, we simply cannot build up a set of deferred salary liabilities without potentially in the knowledge that we're not going to be able to pay them. So I don't see that that's a long-term solution. At the time when the crisis first hit in March, everyone thought, well, we'd be back training, June, and we'd be playing out the end of the season in July and August. Well, that's all changed now. So I think salary deferral scheme is something that certainly we need to be looking at. And ultimately, if we have to cut wages, we have to cut wages if that's what's going to help us get to the other end in one piece. And unpalatable as it is, we wouldn't be the only organisation in the country who's having to face up to these issues.
In terms of the pathway that you put out in the stake of the ground, as you said, of August 22nd, there were lots of weekends in there where we could all begin to dream about maybe seeing the end of the Six Nations, and potentially, if friends are allowed to travel, that they would actually play in Dublin against Leinster in the Heineken Cup. Since then, there have been a bunch of proposals that Francis Barron made public over the last 24 hours or so for a potentially world tournament next summer. How do those ideas get passed around? What's the process for a conversation even beginning to start around what might happen next summer?
It appears that Francis Barron talks to the media first. That's how everything gets passed around. And then he sends a letter to, I don't know who he sends the letter to, but it's, I'm like yourself, I read the newspapers every day, and it's the first I heard of it. I assume someone will have a discussion with him somewhere along the line. But it's, at the end of the day, can I see that working? I don't know.
What do you think would happen next summer? Or what in an ideal world, is it normal Six Nations as scheduled next year, and we get back to some semblance at least of the fixture list of normality?
Well, there's a Lions tour scheduled for next. So, the Lions is the biggest brand in rugby by a long shot, and I think that's one of the things that's out there. And I mean, if we have a dearth of rugby, I think, but we can play the Lions, I think that would be enormously positive for the game worldwide. And they're playing in South Africa, obviously, against the world champions. That adds value to it all. I'd hope that we'd be playing international rugby in October or November, and I hope we'd be playing the Six Nations next February, March. The issue is, what's that going to look like? Is it going to be behind closed doors or not? And again, time will tell. We're just not quite certain how it's going to pan out.
Is the home and away Six Nations an option that's on the table? It's been talked about in the media a good bit as well.
I mean, at this point in time, everyone is planned out, because we're planning against a set of moving targets, and nobody knows what is or is not possible. Nobody knows what the public health regulations across a multiplicity of different jurisdictions is actually going to look like. So there's all sorts of wild and wonderful tournament structures being dreamed up, and all sorts of plans for X, Y, and Z. But the reality is, nothing is really in stone, because we just don't know. I would imagine that really by the end of June, July, we need to be starting to get some sort of shape on what we are actually going to plump for. I think obviously the July tours have gone, and rugby is starting up in New Zealand and Australia. Whether it starts up in South Africa, I'm not sure when that'll happen. And I suppose the big question mark is, will the Southern Hemisphere teams be able to travel? up north in October, November. If they can, well, that's great. If they can't, well, then we're going to have to find some way of playing international fixtures amongst ourselves within Europe. And I mean, someone said you could have the COVID Cup, which would be, some sort of cup competition. You could have home and away Six Nations. You could have a wider group of European unions outside of the Six Nations. There's all sorts of potential opportunities or to actually play international rugby. As to which one is it going to be, I don't know.
Philip, do you think that the rugby ramifications for this could be clubs going out of business, could be amateur clubs going out of business, more unions going to the wall?
If it goes on for a long time, for argument's sake, if we can't play international rugby this year, or if we can't play rugby this year, or if we lose the Six Nations next year, I think it's existential for certainly rugby unions within the Six Nations. I would say it's existential for all of us. The same goes for Southern Hemisphere. Australia, obviously, their financial difficulties are well publicised, and I think what would have to happen is unions would have to take decisions just to pull the shutters down and try and mothball, and obviously that creates another set of difficulties, which, as I say, it's easy to shut things down. It's much harder to open them back up again. At club level, amateur club level, I think there's a lot of clubs out there suffering. They're not just suffering in rugby, they're suffering across a multiplicity of sports in Ireland. And, at the end of the day, if we lose our volunteers at that level, because they've moved on, there's no sport, they've moved on, they're doing other things, or alternatively, really, they don't want to get involved in a failing club where they potentially they're exposed themselves. If we lose all of that, I think it's almost impossible to put it back together again. It's very hard to start a club. It's very hard to keep a club going. But if at the end of the day they find themselves in a situation where they simply can no longer remain open and remain a going concern, I think there will be clubs that are going to be in big difficulty. And I think the government, and maybe I was being a bit sensationalist saying that it could take it the other day when I said it, we could take sport a generation to get back to where it was. But I genuinely believe that if we start losing clubs in GAA, soccer, rugby, you name it, my background is rowing. I know that my rowing club is in difficulty as well. The reality is it'll be very hard to get it all back together again. And I think government need to be aware. I think, to be fair, I think they are aware of it. As to what they're going to be able to do, I don't know.
It's a bleak enough picture. I was kind of hoping that the return of rugby in the Southern Hemisphere would give us some green shoots to look forward to. And I actually think August 22nd is far enough away for if there are any issues that the government might have or the health authorities might have, that we should be able to work through those.
That's right. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. We want to work through the issues, and rather than waiting for someone to say, well, you can go back, in 6 months' time or 9 months' time, or rather just keep us on the hook until they feel comfortable. I think we need to work with the authorities to try and make it happen, because if we don't, we could be sitting here waiting for a long time. And I think, Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand, effectively, and Australia, they haven't had the same level of infection as we've had in this country, and effectively in New Zealand they've wiped out the virus, and so it's a different it's a different set of circumstances. But having said that, we're obviously in touch with New Zealand, trying to understand what they're doing in terms of return to train and return to play. And I think Australia are looking at doing something similar, maybe another few weeks down the road from New Zealand. I would say probably some sort of trans-Tasman competition is probably the most likely first sort of competition that's likely to happen, because of the unique nature of Australia and New Zealand in terms of the level of infection that they have and the way in which they managed to effectively suppress to a large extent the whole disease.
I think the whole world is watching that. Philip, you've been great with your time. We wish you the very best of luck, and thanks very much for being this week's guest.
OTB's State of the Union with Keith Wood.
OTB AM.
Ireland's largest insurer, celebrating 10 years of iconic sporting moments at the Aviva Stadium.
Off the ball.